This is our 10th anniversary of the summit. It's a pleasure to have you all here with us in person and virtually. My name is Shelkie Tao. I'm the Valley Water Landscape Summit Committee Chair, and I will be your moderator for the event. I'm the founder of waterefficientgardens.com, an online landscape design business specializing in creating beautiful and sustainable gardens using primarily low-water native plants. I hold a certificate in environmental horticulture and design from Foothill College and MBA from UCLA. What a fascinating conversation we are going to have today. This year's summit will impact how we think about the landscapes of the future. We will be talking about the science, legislation, and boots-on-the-ground installations that will help guide our choices moving forward. Before we move into the presentations, we thought it would be interesting to find out a little bit more about you and your area of expertise. If you haven't used Kahoot before, it's simple. Here are some instructions. You can see the QR code here. The question number 1. Question number 1, indicate your profession, trying to use only one word, e.g. designer, architect, contractor, conservation, etc. Next, we are going to talk about agenda. Try to use just one word to describe. Next, we are going to talk about the agenda for today. Interesting to see who's here with us today. A few housekeeping details. The summit runs until 12:30 with a short break. For those of you here in person, lunch will be provided afterwards. For more details about topics and speakers, check out the handout you received. We've left it blank inside so you can take notes. For those of you online, see link in chat to access the info. If you need to use the restroom, please follow the signs outside the boardroom to find the restrooms. For professionals who want continuing education units, this landscape summit may qualify. Please contact your certifying organization directly for more information. Certificates of completion will be available at the completion of the summit. For in-person attendees, make sure you indicated that at the registration table, since they will be sent out electronically. Now that we've gotten all that taken care of, let's welcome Vice Chair Richard Santos to open the proceedings. Vice Chair Santos is a native of El Viso, California, and represents District 3. You can sum up Director Santos' life and career through his service to both his country and community. He served our country in Korea, and he served his community with 33 years of service with the San Jose Fire Department and 24 years with Valley Water. He was recently elected Vice Chair for 2025 for the Valley Water Board of Directors, and he has been the board's liaison to the Landscape Committee since 2001. Let's welcome Vice Chair Santos.
Well, good morning, everybody. How about that 4-star breakfast? Good. Well, I really appreciate the committee chair, Tao. Thank you. Welcome to everybody for our 10th annual Landscaping Summit. We had such a great response in these last years, both in person and virtually. It's great to see everyone at this year's Landscaping Summit. Any other directors here, or elected people? Oh, there's my partner, Naishua. We both are the liaison to the Landscaping Committee, and we really enjoy it, and we make every meeting. So thank you, Nai. We have Chief Supply Officer in the back, Aaron Baker. And also, before we get started, Ashley and her posse, the Landscaping Committee, stand up because you guys do a great job. The idea behind the summit is to get input and ideas from you, the landscaping professional community, on how to work together to make conservation a California way of life. Because you are in the field, working with the public, your ideas are so valuable for us. A good example of how important this collaboration is, Valley Water's Santa Clara County is working to meet water use demands during this drought, and how residents continue to save water and have made conservation a California way of life. The landscaping community played a key role in this, and your efforts are very much appreciated. We are very excited about the Landscaping Summit because we have some wonderful speakers coming up who will provide you with tools you need to make the county a leader in sustainable, water efficient landscaping. On behalf of the Valley Waters Board of Directors, I thank you so much for being here today. We look forward to working with you to continue to make water conservation a way of life. To all of you again, for attendees, our committee, and all our staff, thank you and be safe.
Thank you, Shelkie and Vice Chair Santos for that welcome. I'm Ashley Shannon. I'm a senior water conservation specialist with Valley Water. I manage our landscape rebate programs and work closely with our water conservation team to help save water in our area. It's my pleasure now to introduce Kirsten Struve, who will talk about our State of the Valley Water, State of the Valley's Water. Kirsten Struve has over 30 years of experience leading water resource management programs. She's currently the Assistant Officer of the Water Supply Division at Santa Clara Valley Water District, leading water conservation, purified and recycled water programs, drought response, and water supply planning. So welcome, Kirsten. Clicker there.
This does not.
I think just doesn't work. Can I have a clicker? Yeah. Oh, that.
No, not working. I don't think it's on.
Oh.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Okay, never mind. It wasn't
They
on.
work better when they're on.
All right. Welcome and thanks Ashley and thanks everyone for being here. I also want to recognize the entire landscape committee, Ashley and her amazing staff who put this together, and to all our speakers. And I'll be discussing the state of Santa Clara County's water supply. So some of you may already know all this, but I'll go through some background on Valley Water. So we are the Water Resources Agency for Santa Clara County. Our mission is to provide clean, safe water, flood protection, and environmental stewardship for the county. And we are the wholesale water provider to 13 water retailers and also the groundwater management agency for the county. We have a flexible water system that includes 10 local reservoirs, 3 pump stations, 142 miles of pipelines, 3 water treatment plants, 1 purification center, and almost 400 acres of groundwater recharge ponds. And here's a little more information on the breakdown of our water supplies. 30% of Santa Clara County's water supply come from local sources, such as rain captured in our surface water reservoirs and the groundwater. Half of it is imported from outside the county, which means it comes from the Northern Sierra. Some of our retailers also have a contract with the San Francisco Public Utility Commission to receive Hetch Hetchy water. So 40% is imported by Valley Water and 10% by the SFPUC. We also count our water conservation as 15% because we would otherwise be using 15% more water now. And then 5% is from water reuse, but we have a goal to increase that to 10% of our local water supply. And one of the reasons Valley Water was formed in 1929 was land subsidence, which was the land sinking due to overpumping of groundwater in our area, and it sank by 13 feet in some areas. And so this chart kind of shows how the land surface sank, groundwater was overpumped and going lower, and then population increasing with development in Santa Clara County. And as you can imagine, if land subsidence were to resume now, this would have a very significant impact on our infrastructure. But Valley Water has managed the groundwater, and subsidence was halted, and so we try to keep our groundwater healthy. This is the latest information on our precipitation. So San Jose rainfall, 53% of average to date, and the state snowpack is 94% of average as of February 1st. January, as you all know, was very dry, but thankfully we had some rain after. And imported water, which is typically half of our supply, we received 100% allocations in 2023. And end of 2024 groundwater levels were in the normal stage. And current local storage is 101% of restricted capacity. Anderson, of course, is drained per our compliance order, and the 4 other reservoirs also have seismic restrictions. So droughts are a recurring feature of California climate, and global warming is making them worse. And we're seeing longer periods of low precipitation paired with record high temperature. And these wild swings between incredible drought and unprecedented rainfall are expected to continue and worsen in the years ahead. And of course, we also have some risks to our water supply. Even though we have many different sources and therefore are prepared, there are several challenges. Some of them are, of course, climate change and the resulting longer and more frequent droughts, which don't just impact our region, but also our access to imported water. Aging infrastructure, many of our reservoirs were built in the 30s and 50s, and currently 4, like I said, have seismic restrictions. And we are working on making sure that we repair those. And then we have other projects underway also to upgrade our infrastructure. Oops. We are currently working on our water supply master plan. We update this water supply master plan every 5 years, and it's the board's guiding document for investment in water supply infrastructure. And we're using a scenario planning approach to look at 4 possible futures that combine demand and supply. So here you can see there's a stable demand and there's a high demand. And then there's also moderately impacted imports and severely impacted imports. And when you look at a future drought in 2050, you can see that we will have shortage if we don't invest. And this shortage can start as soon as the 2030s. And so that's why we're updating our water supply master plan to guide investment. And just to make sure everyone understands, when we talk about shortage in a drought, that already includes meeting our long-term water conservation goal as well as short-term drought calls during droughts. So water conservation is already included and we still have shortage. And these are the projects we're looking at as part of the water supply master plan for investment. There are different types of projects: alternative supply, meaning a drought-proof local supply through potable reuse or desalination, surface supplies, additional storage, and then also recharge and pipelines. So since we're not currently in a drought, but we continue to encourage making water conservation a way of life, our board actually passed a resolution at the end of the last drought. And since we're prone to droughts and climate change, which are getting more severe, we have also, as part of the water supply master plan, set new targets for 2050. And the targets are all listed here. Somehow the, labels are not coming through, but multifamily residential is about 28%. That's the orange bar. Our CII, or commercial industrial, is 10%. That's the gray. Irrigation is yellow, 10%. And then single family residential is like 49%. So half of our water use in our county is residential. And thanks to the Landscape Committee for considering water conservation as part of all of your efforts, whether or not we have a drought, because you work a lot with residents and commercial businesses and can help us shrink those parts of the pie. There are a lot of people who think that growth means we need more water, but actually we've gotten more efficient in our county. Even though our population has grown, water use has dropped. And when we see droughts, we see, further declines, and then there's a slight rebound after droughts, but it has never reached the prior levels before drought. We do extensive public outreach for our water conservation program, and Ashley will address that in her presentation. And we get increased participation in our programs, which helps us meet our goals and also meet state requirements that our retailers have. And with that, I'm open for any questions.
All right, thank you, Kirsten. We'll go to questions, and so we don't leave our folks online feeling like they're not participating. We'll start first with a question from our virtual audience. No questions?
So far, the virtual audience is very quiet.
Okay. All right. So in person, any questions for Kirsten? We got a mic coming over to you, just so our folks online can hear too. We'll make sure that everyone.
What's the total usage in a year? You had like 99,000 acre feet conservation in 2030. What would the total be in that year projected?
I don't have that number offhand, but the current use is
Percent?
just under 300,000 acre feet, right? Okay.
300,000. So 99,000 acre feet would be 1/3 conservation. Just doing the math.
I don't know if you can quite do the math that way. So our low demand scenario basically envisions a small rebound from this last drought and gets to 330 acre feet, and then the high demand is 350. And so then, we don't know where we're going to end up, right? So it's hard to say what percentage exactly the conservation would be. But we're trying to increase it by, what is it, 45% from now? Something like that.
We have a question online.
We do. With the major increase in high-density housing mandated by the state, are you still anticipating the water use by residential to still decline?
Right now, we're seeing pretty flat demands, and usually infill development is pretty efficient because where we see the most water use, of course, is outdoors. And usually, and now they're required to follow the state's WELO, and indoor fixtures are more efficient as well as what might have been there before. So it's hard to say, but that's why we have bookends when we plan ahead. One is modeled and looks at housing growth. We don't look at population growth, we look at housing growth. So we do consider whether there will be infill in our communities, as well as climate change. And actually a large percentage of the growth in demand is due to climate change and not necessarily growth, because people will need more water for cooling and for irrigation due to climate change. And then the flat one is just hoping we can keep it flat. So so that's how we are planning for the future to use bookends.
Good time for, yeah, one more quick question. Got one in the back, and one, he'll be over with the microphone.
Hi, given our current administration, do we have any federal funding for these programs, and is any of that in jeopardy?
For water conservation, I don't believe we have any current federal funding, so no. But for water recycling and other programs, obviously there is federal funding.
All right, well, thank you, Kirsten. For
Thank
that
you, everyone.
presentation. Thank you. Let's go ahead and skip my picture there. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks again for being here. So I'm going to talk a bit about our water conservation programs, and this is really kind of why we were all here. Our end goal, while we're learning about sustainability and different types of landscaping and stuff, our end goal is water conservation for these presentations and for our water conservation program. So I'm going to go over a little bit about what we've been doing since the past year. So this is just an update. I'm not going to go into depth on all of our programs, but what have we been doing that's kind of new and exciting since our summit last year. So on this slide here, I know it's a lot of words and you're not, I don't expect you to be able to read all of them, but we have a very robust water conservation program, and we come at water conservation from multiple directions. And so we have our rebates, which people are most familiar with, and these are where we actually, issue checks, money to people who go through our rebate programs and, do different conversions to their landscape or indoor or projects. Then we come at water conservation from free programs and services. So we offer free, water-wise outdoor survey programs where we'll look at an irrigation efficiency on sites. We have a large water fluence program where we, provide water budgets to large landscape sites. We will come out and do surveys for those sites. So these are all free programs that we offer. In the agricultural sector, we have a mobile irrigation lab that will do, similar irrigation services and provide support for irrigation scheduling and irrigation monitoring that we provide. Moved without me. And then lastly, we come at water conservation from our outreach and education. So events like this, our landscape summit, our effort to work with the community, work with the landscape community on education, hoping that you all will take this information out to the folks that you work with and spread our information. We also offer professional training series. So for a while, we've offered the qualified water efficient landscaper training. We will have that back. We're in between contracts right now, and I'll get to that later. But those are the kind of trainings that we offer to help to increase water conservation throughout our county. All right. All of the ones in bold listed here are landscape related. And if you go to watersavings.org, we have a very robust website with all of this information. And I'm going to say all these slides and the recording is going to be shared after. So if anyone's trying to capture pictures or anything, this will all be sent out. So I'm going to start with our update. So our landscape rebate program, over the past year in calendar year 2024, we converted about 1.2 million square feet of of lawn. And we were able to remain at our $2 per square foot rate, which was an increase made possible with Measure S Safe Clean Water funding. So we were able to continue that $2 per square foot increase this year and continue to see, high rates of participation. While our participation rates have gone down compared to 2022 and 2023, that is expected. In 2023, we tend to see, a big increase in participation during drought years. When drought is not as focused on in the media and things like that, we do tend to see conservation our program participation lower a bit, but we have not gone back to pre-drought years. So we are still doing more currently than we did during, before our drought began. One trend that we've seen in our landscape rebate program is a shift from the amount of participation that we're getting from larger sites. So commercial, institutional, industrial, multifamily sites. The majority of the participation in our programs is generally from single family homes. Our program is offered to everyone, but 95% of the applications that we get are generally single family. But starting in 2023 and then in 2024, and we're seeing the trend continue, we're starting to see a shift in that participation. So our commercial participation used to be about, as I mentioned, about 5% of our applications were commercial. Now they're, in 2023, it was 9%. We're up to 12% so far this year. And the interesting thing is, even though they're only about 12% of the participation, they actually make up, 43 this year, but last year, 46% of the turf area that is converted. So fewer applications, but much larger projects. And so we are trying hard to reach that commercial sector while still, maintaining the amount of participation that we have from our single family residences. So just an interesting trend that we're seeing in that shift. Last year we were 1 month into the launch of our landscape design assistance program. So I want to give you a brief update on how we've been doing, how it's been going for the last year. So this program modeled after a similar program that Contra Costa Water is using, that East Bay Mud is using, a few other agencies in the state have been using this model, but it's been really successful for us. We have it's a service offered where we have landscape professionals who have signed up to give these on-site consultations. We now have 15 designers that have signed up, and they are able to offer services in 5 different languages. So on our form where we show which designers have showed up, we also show if they can offer bilingual services at all. We've had 51 projects approved, with another 170 or so that have indicated that they are interested in this program. All right. We continue to support the non-functional turf irrigation ban, and Krista will go over this, in depth in her presentation. But we are continuing to help support our water retailers in this effort to do outreach and education. We've got some updates to some of our programs that will help support this effort as far as mapping and identifying non-functional turf. So we continue to kind of learn more about it and help educate the public about that. We also started a webinar series. So G3, I have to give a big thank you right now to G3. We have a contract with them to administer our webinar program, but also our Landscape Summit program. So they are the ones who are helping to facilitate that this week. But we've started with a great webinar series. We've had 3 that we've done so far. And then we have about 4 more planned for the rest of this fiscal year. So in March 20th, we have an outdoor leak detection webinar, and these have been very successful, very popular. We offer them also in multiple languages, so they are simultaneously translated into Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese as well. All right. We have a brand new nursery outreach sign. I love working in this industry because we like to collaborate and share ideas with other agencies. They're not our competition. They're, we like to collaborate. So we got this great idea from East Bay Mud. I think Kirsten is here somewhere, to create this sign. We already do outreach to our nurseries, but providing rat cards, but now we have this really great sign with QR codes. There's an example of it that's out there, and we have it in almost 20 nurseries so far. right? We've also been very, very busy with contracts. So, our contracts allow us to have expanded programs, offer more programs that our staff can't, don't have the bandwidth to offer ourselves. But this year, we have several contracts for programs that are, existing programs that we need to go back out to bid for, or some new programs. And so this year we've awarded so far multiple contracts. So for our landscape maintenance consultation, webinars, our agricultural mobile lab. And every time we go out for a new contract, we look at our programs and we figure out how we can enhance those and how we can add on to those contracts to make it better. We also have 2 contracts that are in process right now that are landscape related. Our large landscape program is in process. That bid closed, but we are in our evaluation process. And then we have an open bid right now for the design of a demonstration garden here at Valley Water. So this will be, this is in our Planet bid system. I won't go too into detail because it is an open contract, so I don't want to go anymore, but that's kind of what we have in the works right now. We also have a landscape direct installation program. We awarded this contract in July of last year, and we've been working with Smart Yards Co-op, was awarded this contract as the program administrator, and we are working currently to create the website for it, create all the paperwork, the application, and they are currently sourcing C27 contractors to help administer this program. This was to take over, this program replaces our Lawn Busters program, which ran for, what was it, 8 years, 8 fiscal years, if I'm doing my math correctly. That program did direct installations for low-income, senior, disadvantaged communities. With that, over the course of that program, we had over 280 sites and over nearly 280 square feet of lawn area converted. Lastly, we have our water conservation campaign. And so we are, we tried hard to message our program, and every, couple of years we have a new campaign that's designed. This last one has been, really beautiful, bringing your yard to life. So this is a campaign that went out to everybody. We've also, this last year, started marketing our Waterwise Outdoor Survey program. So this is a program that we would mention to people when they call, and we had it on our website, but we didn't do active marketing for it. So last year we piloted active marketing for it, and we did some, we refined our online application, and we've seen an increase in participation from that. We've also been promoting our gray water program more and doing direct messaging to this, especially to landscape rebate program participants. So we're figuring out ways to increase the participation in that program that has, otherwise, been a little, we want to see more participation in that. So everyone get your folks in there. And then lastly, we have a series of landscape transformation stories that we've done. And we did about 9 of them with people from the Growing Native Garden Tour that the California Native Plant Society puts on every year. Those transformation stories are on our website, on our YouTube channel, and they're beautiful. But this year, we really wanted to make sure that, we have a very diverse community and diverse, wonderful community. We want to make sure that we were doing our outreach and our marketing to reach, as many people in this county as possible. And so we have 3 transformation stories that we created that are in Vietnamese, Spanish, and Chinese as well. And so these are past rebate program participants, and they are very beautiful stories. So, and with that, visit our website again, and I think we have a few minutes to take some questions if anyone has. And I think we start, again, we'll start with our online folks if Pamela has any. She's got a tricky mic back there.
Yeah, the online folks are still catching up.
Okay. Let's start in the room then. Maybe we'll switch it up and we'll start in the room. Any questions in the room? Yeah.
Hi, of all the people who apply for a rebate, lose your lawn rebate, what percentage of them actually end up with a check afterwards?
I don't have it. I don't have an exact percentage of that. Maybe 60% or so, follow through from start to finish. Some we identify in the beginning as non-qualifying, so we make it applications that actually, don't have a lawn in place or are hoping to do some changes that don't meet the minimum qualifications. A lot of others will do a pre-inspection, and then it may take, it's a big project a lot of times, so it takes a lot of planning. Sometimes people will get a pre-inspection, and 2-3 years later, they will contact us and say, hey, we're actually ready to start our landscape now. So we can see a bit of a lag time sometimes in between when people start and when they do their actual program. But yeah. Any other questions? We have a quiet audience today. All right. Well, with that, oh yeah.
Share a little, I'm sorry. Ashley, can you share a little bit about the rebate program you have for gray water, laundry to landscape? That's like something that we like to be able to promote more.
Yeah, definitely. And Nick Sabard, who's in the back and answering questions really quickly. If anyone in the audience wants to chat about it more during the breaks, go find Nick as he runs that program for us. But this rebate program is offered to residential sites. It's for diverting your laundry water into the landscape. It's a simple system, so it's one that wouldn't require permitting. We don't rebate for more complicated systems like a shower diversion, but it's for, essentially, being able to use that water twice. So you're using it once for your laundry, and then diverting that water into the landscape to irrigate. The rebate is $200 for most of the county, our base rate, but we do have cost sharing partners, so different water retailers who add to our rebate. And in those service areas, it's $400 for the rebate. But we do really recommend, if anyone's doing a landscape conversion rebate and they're doing, landscaping work at the time, really look at that gray water as something that they can add to the project if you're doing it as well. I have a system at my house as well, and I really love it. But we do want to see more participation in that program. We haven't seen the numbers that we're hoping for, so we highly recommend that y'all start kind of incorporating that into maybe your designs or what you do. All right. Well, thank you all. And I think we have passed it over to Stephanie.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here today. My name is Stephanie Morris. I'm a landscape architect. I live locally here in Campbell, and I've been doing a lot of work over the years with Valley Water with lawn replacements and conversions. I focus on native plant gardening with my profession, and I'm also a member of the landscape committee here at Valley Water. It's a great committee, and I highly encourage anybody interested to join. It's a lot of fun. So before we launch into the program today and I introduce the next speaker, we do have another Cahoots question to keep us motivated. And this is kind of a little teaser question to see what we know about this next topic. The question is, what device do humans use for quorum sensing? Okay, it looks like our answer has come in. The thermometer is the top guess, looks like. And the correct answer is actually the blue one, mobile phones. So we're going to learn a little more about that coming up next. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our next speaker coming up. Her name is Dr. Cynthia Daley. Dr. Cynthia Daley is a professor within the College of Agriculture at California State University, Chico. She currently serves as the Rollins Endowed Professor for Environmental Literacy and the Director for the Center of Regenerative Agriculture and Resilient Systems. Cindy is originally from Illinois, where her family has been actively engaged in the farming profession for more than 4 generations. She completed her doctorate at the University of California, Davis. She was responsible for the co-creation and evolution of the Center for Regenerative Agriculture and Resilient Systems, a consortium of interdisciplinary faculty and farmers. Their guiding principle is that regenerative agriculture can be the solution to soil degradation and climate change. Welcome, Dr. Daley.
Question. Yeah, I thought that was great. How is my sound? A little overwhelming. Great. Hey, thank you very much. In the center. All right. Great. Thank you. All right, sure. Hey, I can be.
Direct you.
I thought center of that, and I was stuck in traffic. I do not know how you do it. 3 to 5 miles an hour for an hour and 15 minutes. I'm thinking, really? Yeah, we don't have that in Chico. Don't have that in Orville, most of Northern California. We don't see that. So I've got to hand it to you. You must be the most patient people on the planet. Yeah, that was that was an awakening for me. And I think that question that we opened with was a really good opener. And it tells me a little bit about who I'm working with. How many of you work directly with soil? Love that. How many of you have some familiarity with soil biology? Oh, goodness. And you got that question wrong, Millie? You got it right. Okay. Well, let's kind of dive into this. I want to thank Pamela for the invitation. I'm an ag. You're landscape architects. What do we really have in common? Soil. And the work that we do with soil. The fact that we are soil stewards. It's our job to take good care of that. And when we take good care of the soil, we're also taking really good care of our water resources. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I like to open up with this slide because I work with a lot of conservative ag folks who don't believe we have problems. I'm just kind of curious. Do you guys have problems in your industry with ecological issues, soil degradation, water quality, right? Erosion? Yeah. Well, it's great that you accept those issues. I would say that it's probably about 50-50 with some of the folks that I work with. So it's part of my job to educate and let people understand that. And I'm part of the culture. So it's not as if I'm somebody from the outside poking my nose in the middle of agriculture and saying, got a problem here. I mean, it's my family. It's my brothers, my sisters, it's my aunts, my uncles. It's my culture, so I understand it better than anybody. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up on a corn, soybean, wheat, cattle farm in the heart of the breadbasket, right? And 6 kids, Catholic, 3 farms, do the math. Some of us have to go on and do other things. And so I did. I went on and continued my education. And in that process of multiple degrees, I learned some things about my industry. And, frankly, it's in my blood. It is in, most folks that grow up on a farm tend to really be passionate about it, or they try to get way away from it. It's usually one of those two things. But I recognize that we've got some issues that we need to address. And that's why I think it's important that we recognize that problem so that we can work toward address it. Now, about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States can be directly attributed to how we farm. Animals, farming, those kinds of things. Now, I know that other entities have other numbers. We could probably argue that all day long, but what I will say is that we're on the wrong side of that equation. And we don't necessarily have to be, because we steward one of the biggest carbon sinks on the planet, soil. Very easily, we could be part of the solution. We could be the heroes in this story if we only change our practice. So that is where the Center for Regen Ag comes into play. We recognize the fact that we've got some issues there that we need to address. We know that the planet is warming. We know we're going to have to do things differently. We don't have the same amount of water we had at one time. We're either in a pretty severe drought, and those droughts get longer and deeper, or we're in these atmospheric rivers where we get more water than we know what to do with. What do you do, with 11 inches of rain in an hour? What do you do with that? These are some of the ways that, we need to be adapting. We need to be adjusting because it's a new day. It's a new era, and we need to be prepared for that. And that's why we're working hard at educating students and farmers and the ag industry in terms of how these methods can help us address climate, can help us become better farmers into this very difficult weather scenario that we find ourselves in. The other issue that we definitely need to work on is this issue of soil degradation. We lose, anywhere between 5 and 7 tons of soil per acre per harvest in our row cropping systems. And that's unforgivable. That's because we don't respect our soil resource. Soil is a valuable resource, and we need to really take care of it. It's our job to make it better by having been there, so that when we pass it on to our kids, they have a valuable resource that they can derive their family business, and they then teach their kids the same scenario. So that is something that we need to address. They started the Natural Resource Conservation Service back in the 30s, and we haven't made an awful lot of progress. We've made some, just not enough. Other issues that we've got groundwater contamination, which means that we've got an awful lot of inputs that are becoming solubilized in the water that we're applying, and it's finding its way down into our aquifers. We've got places in the Central Valley that's not fit to drink. When you're looking at 100 parts per million of nitrate nitrogen in drinking water, that's dangerous for human health. We can do better. And it's not just groundwater, it's surface water contamination. It's finding its way then into estuaries. And we've got 405 dead zones on the planet. So it's not just us, but our dead zone is the size of Connecticut. But let's not quibble about who's got the biggest dead zone on the planet. We've got some issues to work on. And I'm wondering, do you think landscape folks make any kind of contribution to any of those issues? Yeah. I was just curious what your response would be. Kind of goes back to that first slide. I do think we can do a better job. And I think that these nutrients are coming from everywhere, clearly from ag. But what about lawns, right? Golf courses, large gardens, community gardens, public parks. Are we stewarding those in a way that really enhance our natural resource, our water, our air, our soil? Those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about today, because we have a bit of a mess on our hands, and we're going to have to think differently in order to solve the problem. We can't keep doing what we've always done. Otherwise, we're just going to get what we already have, or worse. So one of my favorite quotes, and sometimes it goes over okay, sometimes not so much, but by and large, we need to do things differently. It's like any other industry, it's any other business. The reason why you're here is so that you can do a better job, right? You want to stay on top of the politics, you want to stay on top of the legislation, and you want to stay on top of the new cutting edge information, the technologies that are going to help you do a better job. And so kudos to you. You're in the room. Good job. Regenerative agriculture has been defined in a variety of different ways. I was part of a working group with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And there were 14, 15 of us that were working together with the CDFA staff to establish a definition. Now you'll see different definitions depending upon who you talk to, but this is how CDFA is planning to move forward. It's an integrated approach to farming and ranching and landscape architecture, rooted in the principles of soil health, leading to improved targeted outcomes. What are those outcomes? That includes soil health. We want better soil biology. We want our soil teeming with biology, because that biology will do a lot of work for us. We don't have to put as much in the soil when the biology is doing the job for us. They will mobilize nutrients. They will provide nutrients to your plants. And in some cases, they'll bring water from far reaches, even during drought. Biology in the soil is our friend. Other targeted outcomes for regen ag is, restoration of our water resources. Like I said, we've got some issues to clean up. We want to protect air quality. We want to sequester carbon. We don't want to be emitting carbon. Carbon's your friend. Carbon is money, because carbon is the currency that we use to feed biology, and the biology feeds the plants, and the plants feed you. So it really is important. I don't care if you do or don't believe in climate. I have people all across the spectrum. Carbon is still your friend. You need it in the soil. You don't want it up in the atmosphere. You want it in the soil. The more carbon we have in the soil, the more water holding capacity we have, which means fewer irrigation, less irrigation water, fewer irrigations. We become more water efficient just by changing the way we manage our soil. So when Pam asked me to come, I thought, wow, how many acres do you really steward? And it's a lot. Based on what I can pull from Google, it's 40 to 50 million acres that are landscaped in some way, shape, or form. That's a lot of acres, right? Ag, obviously, we're in the business of food and fiber. We feed the planet. Don't care if you're vegan. I don't care if you're I don't care what your style of consumption. You still rely on ag. We feed everybody. We're non-denominational. Cropland, about 390 million acres, pasture and rangeland, about 600 million. And, there are other numbers out there, but that's fairly close. I've got a question up front.
What's your distinction between agriculture and cropland?
Farmland. Farmland is row crop land, orchards, those kinds of things. Rangeland cannot be farmed. And so when you kind of total those together, then ultimately you're in that neighborhood.
So agriculture is the total number.
Correct. Yeah. Good. Some of the basic principles, these are our targets. So we have some basic principles. Okay. No questions right now. Sorry. The 5 core principles are really, basically we're trying to minimize soil disturbance. So try to minimize the amount of disturbance. Every time we put a disc or a plow in a field, it's like a napalm bomb to the soil microbes. They don't like it. And every time you do that, the bacteria that oxidize the organic matter that you want to hold in your soil oxidizes, and it's up into the atmosphere. So minimizing soil disturbance is one of our basic soil principles. Others are maximize your crop diversity. We want lots of biodiversity. We want to keep the soil covered. Obvious reasons. You see anywhere in nature where you've got bare soil. Anywhere in nature where you have bare soil. That's not how nature functions. It's always covered. We need to do the same with our food and fiber system. Maintain a living root year round. That's easy for you. Most of you have irrigation. You try to maintain that year round. You can abide by that principle fairly easily. Not so easy for those of us in ag, because, you know, we have seasonality. There's a cropping season. And if you go up and down I-5, you'll probably see a lot of bare soil this time of year, yeah? It's not good. It's not good for the planet. And then, of course, we want to integrate livestock where we can. And that's one of the more controversial of the soil health principles, but it does, in fact, you know, add and enhance the ecosystem. Running cattle back, when I grew up, we always had cattle out on corn stalks. So we would come through in the fall, harvest corn, and then turn the cattle out. They were great at gleaning, you know, the stuff that the harvester missed. So we had all this corn that fell on the cattle did a great job picking that up. We also ran hogs under the cattle. It was much more diversified in those days. And then we tend to have chickens running after both of them, and I won't tell you what they ate. But boy, were those eggs rich. Nutrient dense. Yummy. These are the tools that we have in our toolbox in order to achieve the soil health principles. So it really doesn't matter what your cropping system, and I don't care if you're doing trees, you know, or you're an annual crop wheat grower, if you're pasture land, doesn't really matter. You can apply tools to your cropping system working toward these soil health principles. So I consider all of these tools that are in my toolbox, and I just pull out the tool that I need that fits my context, that fits my operation in a way that works for me. Every farm, every ranch, different. Every farmer, every rancher, different. Every landscape architect, every, you know, think about all of your customers and your clientele, everyone is different. I'm guessing. So different tools for different needs, but ultimately the goal is to shift into a carbon smart, climate smart, regenerative approach or paradigm from this more conventional approach where we're not very water efficient and we're on the side of heavy emissions. So for us in ag, this looks very, very differently. Our standard practice is this scorched earth approach. It's bare soil. That's how they normally function, which means they will have had to go through there with a herbicide, a couple different herbicides, in order to get that. From their perspective, what they're doing is they're conserving water. What they don't realize is that they're losing water with that system. The soil heats up, there's nothing to protect it, water's evaporating. And the soil wicks from down under up into, and you lose that water from down low because it's wicking up from the lower profile. They say that there's no weeds here. Well, there isn't a weed in the one on the right. It looks like chaos, but those are all planted. It's a multi-species, very diverse cover crop that's providing a ton of food for the soil biology. So it's a fantastic approach. That side of the equation hits all 4 of the 5 soil health principles. This happens to be a neighbor of mine, Danny Unruh, and he does use sheep now to graze off that cover crop in April. That gives him plenty of time to kind of move through and have a system where he can still harvest his walnuts off the floor. Row cropping system, very similar. Standard practice, emits CO2, destroys soil organic matter, and loses water. And on the regen side, it's not so much. And it's really just that different. Look at that difference. You folks work with soil. Look at the difference in that soil. One is open and porous as soil should be. There should be at least 50% open pore space. It should be very light, porous, because we want water to infiltrate. We don't want water to run off. Water is going to run off here. Does this thing, oh, I got a pointer. This is, you know, basically the same soil, just managed differently. This water is going to hit that and run off. And it's going to take your nutrients with it. So ultimately, you're not really retaining and you're not going forward. Pretend Lal is one of my heroes. He's a very famous soil scientist from Ohio State. He's published many papers on regenerative agriculture, and he says it's a system-based approach that just reconciles the need of producing adequate and nutritious food with the necessity of restoring the environment. So it just makes farming a solution to our environmental problems. This is one of our iconic farmers in regenerative ag, Gabe Brown. He lives it, breathes it, teaches it. You probably have heard of him, my guess. Written the book, Dirt to Soil. If you haven't, you ought to read it. It's a good story about his paradigm shift. And, you know, layering and stacking practices are where it's at. Gabe does it as best as anyone. You know, we really do need to layer these practices, and then they start to synergize and work together in order to get the best outcomes. This is Gabe's learning curve. This is where he started out in 1963 or 1993. 63 would have been a long time. 1993, he started out about 1% soil carbon. That's really, really low. There's not a lot of biological functionality going on there. And he went into no-till really out of economic necessity, started rotating in different crops out of necessity, and started to notice that his soil health was sort of improving when he moved out of that typical corn, bean, heavy tillage type of scenario. And then he got into cover crops, and then pretty soon the light kind of came on. And when he reached 3% soil organic matter, he realized that I don't have to apply as much fertilizer anymore. And as a matter of fact, I don't have the same pest loads. So fewer pesticide applications, because the biodiversity provides the beneficial habitat that outcompetes the bad guys. So another benefit of that biological diversity. He's one of these more intuitive type farmers that can really see change happen, and it made economic sense. You can read all about it in his book. It's really quite entertaining. He's a very funny, interesting guy. But diversity on the surface of the soil means biodiversity under and in the soil. We have to recognize that every plant has got, a root architecture that is going to be working into the soil profile, and they're going to be producing very different root exudates. And that's what a root hair does. So think of millions of miles of these root hairs doing this. Now, obviously, this is an electron microscope that's capturing a root hair as it's pushing out its root exudates. Under normal conditions, there would be an awful lot of biology there sucking up all of that nutrition. So the plant is feeding the biology, and in return, the biology is actually feeding the plant. It is a symbiotic relationship that has been established for a millennium, and we just are starting to figure it out. We're not all that smart, but we're working on it. Soil is alive. It's a living, breathing thing. It should be a living, breathing thing. I've seen many farms where I would say it's dirt, and fortunate to be affiliated and associated with some farms that's clearly soil. Soil is alive. It is alive. Lots and lots of biology. And the more biology you have, the more interconnectedness that you have. These bugs talk to one another. They get together. They gang up on some. They definitely have a communication strategy. You wouldn't necessarily think of that because, they're all this microscopic billions and billions of organisms that live in that soil, and they are, in fact, communicating with one another. And they're communicating with the plant. So, this is out of one of the journals that demonstrate how these organisms are secreting compounds, and these compounds then are picked up by their neighbors and makes them secrete compounds, and then they secrete compounds. And then pretty soon you've got a group of organisms that are really synthesizing, specific exudates that are really quite beneficial to the plant. They do have a very elaborate communication strategy, and that's why the cell phone was the correct answer on that question. Now, Pam gave me some marching orders. She said that there was, several different topics that she wanted me to talk about, and quorum sensing was one of them. I do think it's important to understand that, the more diversity you have, the better the communication structure, because the more diversity, better communication. We just have more bugs to relay the message. It's exponential in terms of how it goes. And you have self-talk, where you have some of these compounds being secreted, where they talk to themselves. I talk to myself all the time, so this doesn't really surprise me. Then there's crosstalk, and then there's eavesdropping that takes place. So, not all quorum sensing is really the same thing. They could pick up a signal from another pair that's talking back and forth, and then suddenly they're part of that conversation. So we call that eavesdropping. Another way in which these organisms are providing nutrients to your plants is through this rather new phenomenon we call rhizophagy. And that is where bacteria is actually working its way into the root itself, right into the root. And what happens is that it actually is releasing nutrients in there, and it becomes nutrition in and of itself. So it's feeding the plant by sacrificing itself. So the root hairs are basically consuming and eating, rhizophagy, the bacteria. But the bacteria are volunteering for the job. It's not like they're going out there with teeth or it's not that aggressive, but it's very cyclical. So we're going to see, this constant rotation. And this was the original paper. I just didn't want you to think I was making this stuff up. So I brought the paper with me, and you too can look it up and read all about it. This is a peer-reviewed journal article. The guy is Dr. James White. He is brilliant. You can find a lot of his work on YouTube, so check it out. Another aspect of soil biology that I really have a great deal of respect for, that you need to have a great deal of respect for, is mycorrhizal fungi. That is a mass communication network of where these hyphae coming from the fungi intertwine with the root hairs of this plant. The root structures at the core of this picture, everything else that looks like the top of a tree, fungal hyphae. Look at how many more miles of surface area we're able to mine nutrients and work with organisms and bring all of that great stuff back to the mother, the plant. So these are really positive interactions. This is incredibly symbiotic. The more mycorrhizal fungi you have in your system, the better your plants will function. Their immune system will be stronger. The plants will be more vigorous. They will grow faster. And for us, an egg, we get, at least better yields. Now, they too, kind of like some of the rhizophagy that I was talking about, have this capacity to work their way into the plant cell. So this is these are the spores. This is a root hair. And what these organisms are, these fungi are actually just adhered to that root hair. So that's an electron micrograph of an actual interaction between a root and a fungi, mycorrhizal fungi. And to demonstrate what's going on here, we have this panel that talks about the symbiotic interface, where we have the spore, and then we have the hyphae, and we have the integration into the plant cell. What is the fungi doing integrating into the plant cell, you might ask? Would you ask that? Yeah. Well, the answer is they are actually turning on genes inside the plant cell, getting that plant to gene express ways that they would have never done without the fungi. Again, it's a collaboration. It's a symbiosis. Fungi are your friend. I tell my students, we need to farm fungus because they are your friend. And I tell you, the quickest way to ruin your fungal networks is to plow. You got it. Makes sense, doesn't it? You completely kill all that fungi. Great way to destroy what you just created. So ultimately, that's what we want to work away from. And what I love about these other panels is it just basically shows you just how intimate these organisms interact. We actually have changes in expression, gene expression. So we are getting secondary plant metabolites to kind of come out, oxalates and different components like jasmodic acid, phytoalexins. All of those kinds of things are really helpful for the plant. It can't run away and go, but it can be producing those things. Now, for a cow or a grazer that comes along, that just means good things for them because those are all antioxidants that are really potent with respect to building their immune system as well. So all is well there, although the plant had to sacrifice itself in order to get there. Now, this is a photograph, another electron photograph of hyphae interacting with a root structure. And you can see it's very, very slimy. And that slime is really important to create these biofilms. And you'll know that you've got great mycorrhizal populations when you pull one of your plants out of soil and it looks like dreadlocks. That biofilm is coming from the fungal species that is intimate with the root itself, and soil particles are attached because it's sticky, it's slimy. You can see how sticky it is, right? And so we actually make this a kind of an anaerobic environment, and we actually can start making nitrogen because that tends to be an anaerobic process. So here we have free living organisms that are actually fixing nitrogen for you. What does that mean? It means you don't have to apply as much outside nitrogen. As a matter of fact, if you do apply outside nitrogen, it's like shooting yourself in the foot, because then your microbes won't produce nitrogen because it's on a bit of a feed. It's going to sense too much nitrogen in the system, and it's not going to be fixing nitrogen. So you do need to be careful about that. This is a bit of a new thing. The fact that we've got free living nitrogen bacteria that when they're in that anaerobic setting that we've created with really great soil health, they'll fix some nitrogen. So ultimately, all of that slime and all of that great exudates make stronger aggregates, which means our soil particle holds together. This is called a slake test, and that tells us just how strong our aggregates are. We want strong aggregates. And that resists, erosion, wind erosion, water erosion, and so on. And that is really hard to fake. People say, oh, people are going to be greenwashing this whole regen ag thing. All I need is a shovel. And I can tell you who is or who is not in a regenerative model. It is just that simple. That is very porous, lovely aggregate, lots of living life there. It's all really good stuff. And, so those were most of the components that she wanted to include, just to tell you how important it is that the biology can work for you and for your plant systems. And really, you're not doing yourself any favor by not paying attention to it. Steward your soil, steward your biology, and they will take care of your plants and therefore take care of you. So it is a symbiotic relationship that you need to develop. We do a lot of research, and that's really how I happened to meet Pam, is really through some of the work that we're doing with the Metropolitan Water District down in Southern California. And here, this is Heyday Farms. They're one of our farmer cooperators. There's Dale Tyson. He's one of our co-PIs on our project. And you want to hear about this study? Okay. This was kind of an interesting introduction to the Palo Verde Valley. Do you know that it's 120 degrees down there in the summer? It's hot. Well, part of what's going on down there in that Palo Verde Valley is that they do have a lot of irrigation water that they're utilizing, and trying to use it as effectively as possible means that they asked their users to set aside 10%. And when they set aside, they asked them to do this, because they didn't want any water going on that 10% set aside at all, so that they could conserve water. What a dumb idea. So they were tilling that 6 times a year to prevent weed seeds. And every time they would do it, they would be sending CO2 up into the atmosphere. And they would be losing water. And now that that's really bare and it's 120 degrees, what do you think is happening? All of that underground water is wicking up and going away. So they weren't conserving water. They only thought they were. And who would say that that should actually capture more water? Do you think that should capture more water when it rains? Yeah, it does not capture more water. That actually caps, and water will run off. When we get 5 inches of rain in an hour on this field, it's going to capture everything, and it's going to hold everything. And you will be able to then have that water available. We've been tracking temperatures, and obviously that soil is a lot cooler under cover, as you would expect, which means we're also conserving a lot of water, and the bugs like it better too. We almost tripled our biological components of that soil just by changing our management. Here is one of our first results. This is called a PLFA, it's a phospholipid fatty acid analysis. It helps us profile the soil microbiome. And ultimately what this does is it shows you just how much total biomass you have in your soil. And in the regenerative side, we statistically have a lot more than we do on the control side of the house. And look at that arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Didn't I tell you how wonderful that stuff was? Look what we did to that. That is a sizable improvement in mycorrhizal. And then that, because we changed the biology, now we had more stable aggregates. We completely changed that soil structure. Now that soil structure is more resilient to climate. It's going to hang around longer. And because it's more porous, we're going to receive more water, hold more water. And actually now California is all about recharge. This is a great way to recharge our aquifers, is by allowing water to percolate through the soil system. So it's all about soil structure. Soil tilth, there's water infiltration. Obviously, we're infiltrating more water per hour than we are. I think that's actually, centimeters per second. But you get the gist. We're incorporating a lot more water than we would in our control setting. And then finally, we get to the carbon thing. So it kind of goes like, it starts with changing biology. You change practice, you change the biology, you change the soil tilth, the soil structure, and then you start to accumulate carbon, which means you've stopped emission and now you're drawing down because you're starting to accumulate carbon. And carbon's your friend. The more carbon in the soil, the more food for the bugs, the more food for the plants, the more water holding capacity. Carbon is money. It is a currency. And we did that in very short order. Very short order. This is where we need to be on the left. This is where we were on the right. And we did that in 3 years. Not bad. I think I'm going to stop there and I'm going to go and take questions. Yeah.
So is part of your so is part of your organization, is it to educate farmers in California, I guess, to the regen ag approach? And if so, how many farms have you converted to that philosophy?
That's a great question. We have 4 programs ongoing with the center since we started in 2019. So just kind of keep that in mind. We're just getting off the ground. We have a farmer transition program that is supported by a couple of federal grants. We have a food hub grant that really supports our local growers, and we try to market their food and get it into schools and hospitals and other places where they couldn't have gotten before. We have an educational program, and we have a technical assistance provider training program in climate smart regenerative agriculture. All of those programs go to do exactly what you're talking about. Help to transition growers. Now, how many have we actually transitioned? We've got 4 sites up and down California with Dale Tyson where we're doing side-by-sides. And in every one of those scenarios, the farmer has become engaged in that. Dale's really taken off with it, and he's been doing all kinds of different processes. But our TAP team, just through our transition programs, through our 2 federal grants, have actually transitioned 40,000 acres in that period of time. We've had applications for twice that. So if we had more people, more bandwidth, more funding, I mean, we could double that, you know, and in terms of the emissions savings, it's about 18,000 tons of carbon that we've actually, you know, not only stopped, but drawn down. So we have that dashboard on our website. You can go to our website. You'll see it come up on the landing page, the first one. We're going to try and keep that updated. But we're not the only one out there doing this kind of work. We're doing our part that we think universities need to be jumping in and supporting the industry with. We've got industry folks that are just going gangbusters. Farmers like to learn from farmers. So we try to support that as much as possible. We have soil health field days coming up in March. And most of our speakers are our regenerative farmers, and they're going to be talking to other farmers, and that helps transition growers. There is other organizations out there, John Kemp with Advancing Eco Ag. John's phenomenal, and he's transitioned a lot of growers. He's a farmer himself, right? But he's also a podcaster and a bit of a celebrity. And then we have Understanding Agriculture, which is a conglomerate of several farmers, right? Kind of led by the Alan, Gabe, and team, and they've been transitioning farmers heavily throughout the Midwest, but they definitely have gotten more tentacles now as they've built bandwidth into all of the US, Canada. They're even international, although they told me they never would, because we have so much work to do here. I mean, we have so much work to do here. We're heavily impacted by big ag, you know, by petrochemical companies that, you know, really want to sell all this stuff to farmers. And so there's a lot of pushback there. So it's going to take a big effort on our part to kind of keep pushing that envelope. But great question.
Yeah, next question. Can we take one from our online audience next? And while we're waiting for that to come up, could you give your website?
csuchico.edu/regenerative ag.
Perfect. Thank you.
If you just Google us, yeah, Chico State Center for Regen Ag, you'll find us. That website is encyclopedic. We've been working on it for 6 years. So you'll find all kinds of information there.
Wonderful.
So we've had a lot of questions online about sort of bridging the gap between the actual practices in regenerative agriculture and the practices that we can be using in urban soils. And one of the things that the discussion has kind of been centered around is if we are preparing landscapes for planting native plants and ornamentals, is cover cropping something that we can do to help build the soil for that more woody type of landscape or perennial landscape? Is it a way that we can move things forward? And is it possible that cover cropping itself could just be the end goal?
Right. I think that there's lots of different ways to use them, and there isn't any one right way. If your goal, your context really sets the stage, that will set the plan. If your context is to to reclimate this area into all native plants, then your goal is to do that in a way that's going to be as biologically diverse as possible. But you still need to keep the ground covered, right? You still need to be, maintaining the living root year round. And that can all be done, and you can be doing it with other things like mulch and compost and things like that, that also provide cover to the soil, which I think, you can point out, especially if your plant density is heavy. Because as those plants mature, you have canopy, and that canopy also provides, shade. But let's keep that soil covered, and that's really what the multi-species cover crop does. It also provides pollinators with a very diverse menu, a smorgasbord of different pollens and nectars to be working from. So, strategically placing hedgerows in locations where you can really facilitate that, really, provide that kind of support. You can be doing strips of multi-species cover crops. We just feel like no-till and multi-species cover crops are two ways to reclimate soil. So if what you've got, you inherited a mess. Oh, I call it BTS soil. Beat to shit soil. I would spend time just reclimating that. Just let it, don't till it. Put no-till cover crops. If it's got legacy compaction, you need to deep rip it. And I know that sounds counterproductive, but legacy compaction is one of the most difficult things for us to overcome as we transition into no-till. And I've seen wrecks happen when growers went into no-till without doing their homework. And their homework means you open up that soil. You get rid of that legacy compaction. We can talk more about that. That's kind of a no-till 2.0 that we can talk about it some other time. But those are the two practices that I think have the biggest impact on soil. And compost applications, putting that organic matter back into that soil. Do you watch the Carbon Marin Project? Go online and take a look at that if you want to see what compost can do to low carbon soils. It's miraculous. It's adding carbon, organic matter. It's like a soil probiotic that you're putting on the soil for that really low carbon stuff that has no tilth to it, that's like powder. That needs a lot of emergency care. Let's get into serious, resuscitation mode and hit it with everything you've got in order to get that soil functioning again. And then, at the meantime, you can be planning how you want to lay out things in order to get the land or the plant distribution that you're looking for. I think the planners have the biggest job of anybody, because you want to try and get that right that first time. And so that takes a lot of research and really understanding the landscape that you're working with. Our planners, they do a full assessment of an entire farm. It could be, 5,000 acres. It could be 10 acres that they're working with, but they're still going to profile it, look at the soil type. They're going to do a full soil assessment to kind of figure out what they're working from. And then they'll be working with the grower in order to develop a plan that really helps to meet their goals while we're rebuilding that soil health and helping them to achieve their business.
Okay, next question we'll take from the audience right here.
Have you done any work with, or do you have an opinion on biochar?
I have not, but I've read some papers on biochar and it looks really promising, but I just don't have enough information on it to be able to speak intelligently on biochar. I saw a lot of that stuff early on. It didn't look great, but that was because people were just using biochar raw. And we know that we need to incorporate biochar into compost to get it acclimated, right? We need to prime the pump on that. And that's, you put that biochar into compost, that populates all of those little cavities in that biochar with some really luscious biology. And that's kind of changed the whole picture from my perspective on biochar and how biochar can be used.
Just a comment about the biochar. Did anybody see the EPA webinar yesterday about soils and soil? Really great guys from Oregon State or something. And he said that the biochar products out there are not all good biochar. So it kind of depends on the material you're using.
Mhm.
And if it doesn't have an impact, it could be because it probably wasn't properly prepared. That wasn't my question. Um,
Good point, though. Good
Uh,
point.
Some people might be confused about the slide that you're talking about, the biofilms, how you have a localized anaerobic situation where the nitrogen fixation is taking place.
Mhm.
But I just don't want there to be any confusion. I mean, a lot of us in urban soils run into anaerobic conditions, and I don't want people
No.
to think, oh yeah, you know, these general anaerobic conditions are great, because we're
No.
taught you want aerobic
You do.
conditions generally in the soil, but it's these localized places like the inside of a fava bean nitrogen fixing nodule. That little
Mm.
inside the nodule is
That's
anaerobic.
correct.
That's where it's happening. We want our soils to be aerobic though, and I just don't want anybody to be
Yeah.
confused.
Absolutely. And it's the dreadlock itself. And it's the interface between the root hair, you know, and the slime where we end up with that anaerobic condition where we can harbor those nitrogen, free living nitrogen fixing bacteria. So everywhere else around the dreadlock and, you know, throughout, we definitely we want aerobic soil. You know, soil is 50% airspace. It should have 50% airspace if it's high quality soil structure.
Do we have any other online questions before I take another question from the audience?
I think there's so many online questions about, really about the issue of disturbance and no disturbance. You know, how does that translate into what we're doing? And also this notion of species and family diversity and how that actually happens in an urban landscape as opposed to in a agricultural setting. So I'm trying to answer it as well as I can.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
that's really it. I wanted to say one thing, and that was about biochar. One of the things that we always talk about is biochar can make a good house for microbes.
Mhm.
So if you're thinking about it in that way,
Mm.
it's something that in and of itself, it's not really doing anything, but it is creating the conditions for that microbial community to flourish. So it's just something to think about.
I think we have one more minute or so for one more quick question.
Is this on?
Yes, go right ahead.
Actually, I have two questions. What percentage of carbon is optimal to be in the soil? And my second question is, not on? Okay, what percentage of carbon in the soil is optimal? And my other question is, given what's going on at the federal level, what's the prognosis for regenerative ag going forward?
Yeah, yeah, your crystal ball is probably as good as mine. I really don't have a finger on the pulse of that scenario, other than the fact that, you know, we had some emergency budget meetings yesterday about the fact that, you know, there are some of our federal funds have been froze because it has climate associated with it. So there is that. I do know that there's been this mad dash to change the vocabulary so that it would kind of pass the AI scrutiny. Artificial intelligence is kind of like screening a lot of the federal funds. And as long as it doesn't come up with DEI or climate, it can pass. So I think some of that, that's kind of what we're faced with, isn't that something? Anyway, so there's that. And then your other question is how much? Well, you know, more is better. You know, clearly that. I will tell you that our rangelands right now, especially after 3 years of drought, you know, got below 1%. That's dangerous. We continue to emit there. We need to really do a number on our rangelands particularly, and our tilled farmlands are always less than 1%. That's also very dangerously low. At that point in time, it's just dirt. And it's eroding and, you know, it's going up, it's going into our water. Ideal 5% or more. That's ideal. And I probably have had a handful of growers in California that are in that category. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of different tests for that. So soil laboratories can do that soil organic matter percent for you. Oh yeah. Yep. We have a whole website on soil testing.
Is there a test for that? And that was,
Oh, you don't want to go to a
Field
lab. Yeah. You don't want to go to a lab. You don't want to go to a lab.
Okay.
Anybody have a solution for that? Turn the shovel. Yeah, if you, yeah.
She's saying, look for the biology. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's that. I like to track progress over time, so that's why I like a number. But you can tell the difference, in that soil. Just turn it over and then, keep that soil, and then 2 years later, open that up and take a look at it. If you're not making progress, change what you're doing. So I like to have some kind of a metric to monitor so that you are always in a constant state of progressive improvement. But soil testing can be pretty simple and pretty cheap. It doesn't have to be expensive, but it may not be your thing at all, and I get that.
Actually, we do have to wrap up questions. Sorry I know we have so many great online questions and in person, but we do have to wrap up because we have a schedule to keep. So thank you so very much for your time and your excellent
Absolutely.
presentation today, Dr. Daley. We are now, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Very, very informative. And I know we have so much to learn about how to apply this to landscapes, and we'll continue that conversation. We're going to take a quick break right now to stretch, get up, help yourself outside to some snacks. We're going to return and start promptly at 10:25 for our next presentation. So if you can come a few minutes before 10:25. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. There we go. All right, welcome back, everyone. Before we get started again and get settled in for our next speaker, we're going to do another Cahoots question. It's coming up on your screen right now. Question is, approximately how much water is used per year to irrigate a typical 1,000 square foot turf landscape in Santa Clara County? Okay, the majority of us guessed 56,000 gallons per year, and actually the answer is all of the above. So even a well-managed lawn can be as low as 36 gallons per year, so that answer is correct. However, all of the above, because a landscape could actually require as much water as all of these answers. There's quite a range. So now it's time for our next speaker, Ms. Krista Guerrero. Krista Guerrero has over 20 years experience in the drinking water industry. She received a bachelor's degree from Cornell University and a master's from the University of Florida. She has experience in source water protection, stormwater management, water efficiency, and water resource management. She specializes in outdoor conservation and water policy and currently manages several outdoor efficiency programs for the Metropolitan Water District, while also assisting in the development of state and federal water regulations and legislation. Welcome, Krista.
Hello, good morning. I am the direct left turn from what we were just talking about out of the sort of hard science and into policy and legislation. That's my area of expertise. As you said, I've been doing this for closer to 25 years at this point. I'm very happy to be here today to discuss all of this with you. I'm not going to talk about Metropolitan and who we are and all our fun stuff. That's not why you're here. You're not even in our service area, so you don't care. But I am going to talk to you about a lot of different pieces of legislation that Metropolitan either helped to develop or that we take a very active role in. And so therefore, I have a pretty good understanding of how it all works. So we'll get through that. So we're going to be talking about what's the past, the present, and the future of California landscaping legislation. I'm going to be talking about 3 very specific regulations, legislation that we have. And then I'm going to be talking about some of the ideas and things that have been tossed around in state Congress, state legislature about what could be coming in the future. Some things that are being proposed by different organizations, by water agencies as well. None of them are concrete. No, nobody panic when we get to that part of this conversation and start thinking that any of these things may actually happen, but they are certainly part of the conversation. So you've heard already several times today about the importance of water conservation and why we care. And Valley Water did a really great job of explaining, showing you the graphs and the pictures from the different droughts and explaining how climate change makes that impact and how we have to keep adjusting for that. So I won't beat a dead horse on that one, but I did want to just make a point that when we talk about water conservation outside of drought periods, we are talking about this idea of an improved efficiency. And that much of the legislation that you're seeing and that's going to continue to come out is based on this idea of improved efficiency as a baseline for California, right? So it's this concept of the idea that for water resource and water efficiency, there are all of these benefits that go along with it. And those benefits are something we should have year round, every year, all the way into the future, right? This is no longer a knee-jerk reaction because we have a low supply in a certain period of time or we have a high demand in a certain part of the year. It's this concept of a continual need to have an efficient system so that we are always achieving all the benefits that go with that. Things like saving energy, things like urban cooling, all the other pieces that go with it. Turf replacement programs are sort of the big picture for many water agencies in California. Metropolitan itself has the largest turf replacement program in the country. And you've already heard about Valley Water's turf replacement program. You're going to see more and more of those. Most agencies that have them, it's all a matter of, do they have the functional resources to put one of these on? It's a very expensive program to run. And it definitely has in the past few years, maybe decade or so, felt like this trend of grass is bad and we're going to replace grass with something else. That's certainly not what we're saying. But what we are saying is that in Southern California, I'm sorry, Sue, see, you can tell I'm used to doing this in Southern California. In California as a whole, grass itself is mostly introduced. And so therefore not what was here native, not here, hundreds, thousands of years ago, something that we have to adjust to. And that's what we're trying to correct, for lack of a better word, right? How do we make that transition away from the idea that turf is all there is? And that's what, again, you're going to see in a lot of the policy and legislation. So why such a huge focus on outdoor? Right? When we talk about conservation a lot lately, when you see the policies and the legislation that are coming out, everything seems to be focused on outdoor. And the first question I always get is, why is everybody picking on the outside? Why is everybody picking on landscaping, right? Why can't we just be left alone to do what we've been doing and we know what we're doing, we manage it well, we're professionals? Completely understand the concept, but the reason behind the why is in this pie chart. So when we talk about making urban water use more efficient, we talk a lot about where is all our water going, right? And indoor, if you recall from 15, 20 years ago, it really did get beat to death at that time. There were a lot of advances and a lot of technologies and a lot of ideas about how do we make the inside of buildings, businesses, homes more efficient, right? How low can we get a toilet gallons per flush? Right? How low can we make a shower head? What can we do for our faucets to make it more efficient? What can we do to structure on or to work on leaks and make sure that that's not an issue moving forward, right? What new devices can we put on our properties so that it catches leaks, so that it tells us how much water we're using so we can make better choices? All of that has been going on for a very, very long time. And we've certainly reached the point, I wouldn't say that we are as efficient as we could possibly be indoor, but we are certainly way more efficient than we used to be and considerably more efficient than we are outside. So this function of, one, that a lot of gains have been made in the indoor space, and two, that most of your water in a residential home or a property really is used outdoors has shifted everybody's focus. So when we are looking for where's our low-hanging fruit, where can we go to make sure that we get those gains? What can we do to be more efficient? Outdoor is squarely in those sites, and that's where we are now. Outdoor water use is the first thing that gets picked on during droughts, right? We've seen that. We've seen that multiple times. I'm sure you as landscape professionals are very aware of that. All of a sudden, you could water when you needed to, and now you can only water 2 days a week or 1 day a week. Or down in my area during the last drought, not at all, because there was no water for that, right? And that's certainly the moment when this concept of having a lawn or having a grass space is perceived as a bad thing, right? You don't need that. That's in your way. It's just wasting water. Again, not really the narrative we're trying to make, but it does tend to sound that way unintentionally, right? Really, it's a section of degrees. If you had to choose between taking a shower, using water for cooking, flushing your toilet, or watering your outdoor space, which one sounds more important, right? Which one sounds like something you're going to do first? Right? I don't know about all of you, but I really like taking showers, so I am going to turn off my water if I need to. But that continual gradation of what's most important always seems to push outdoor landscaping to the bottom. And really what agencies and policies are trying to do is to shift it so that we are as efficient as possible outside, and we're not actually saying lawns are bad, outdoor landscaping is bad. We're just saying we're going to have less water on these so that we can water everything, so that we can flush, take a shower, and water our landscaping at the same time, hopefully, right? That's the concept. That's the idea. In the past, also, municipalities were responsible for handling their demand and supply on their own, right? There wasn't legislation, or a lot of legislation, that really talked about the proper way to irrigate landscape or what to do in a drought to make sure that there was enough water supply. So municipalities, water agencies took what we would kind of call the easy approach. First thing that we would do is say, okay, well, people need a shower, they need to cook, they need to flush their toilet, so let's turn off all the irrigation outside, and then we'll have enough water for everybody to do the other things. That is the simple approach. Simple, and it works. And good or bad, that's sort of that knee-jerk, light switch on and off that we continue to do. Again, that's why you're seeing policy now, and we're going to talk about today, policy now that's shifting away from that concept, shifting away from this idea of if we can figure out a way to do this correctly, we won't need that knee-jerk reaction anymore. We won't have to take that simple approach. That's the goal, ultimately. There's also, we've admitted in the past, we have problems with finger pointing, with people not really communicating with each other well. All of this built up concerns and issues and problems that we have when we get into these drought situations, trying to tell landscapers, trying to tell customers how to water properly, what the priorities are. None of that has been handled great. I will say that from the very beginning, Metropolitan being one of the largest, we haven't done a great job with that in the past either. So that's part of what we're trying to change and trying to move towards this idea of sustainability. Part of this idea of moving away from this knee-jerk reaction and the landscapes are bad or lawn is bad is really honing in on the benefits of landscaping in urban ecology, right? I know I'm preaching to the choir here. You all already know this. Some of you are laughing at me because you're like, well, duh, I told you that 20 years ago. We know. But it took us a while. Ooh, sorry. There we go. I don't think I broke it, Pamela. It took us a while to get to the point where we could quantify these times for us. So unfortunately for water agency, if I can give you the water agency's perspective for just a minute, everything in us is a quantifiable piece of information. And ultimately, for a water agency, that its whole job is to sell water. Our quantifiable information is how much water do people need and how much do we have? And if those two numbers don't match up, how much do we need to be more efficient by? How much do we need to conserve to make those numbers match? right? That's the basics, very, very basics. And those were the only numbers that mattered, right? If you don't sell water, you don't have money. If you don't have money, you can't pay your employees or import more water. So that's always a problem. The shift that you're seeing now in water agencies and in the state is this idea of pulling in these other co-benefits to this kind of ecology and understanding the value that they have as well. So we know that there's a lot of benefits to landscaping. The carbon emission reductions, improved air quality, erosion control, food production, habitat, all of those things. They've existed throughout time, but now water agencies are actually paying attention to that and saying, okay, there's a value to that that also offsets and helps us, and how do we make that work for us? And you're going to see that in the legislation as well. So let's talk about those pieces of legislation. These are the three main ones that you will hear about the most often. Not saying that they are the only, but they are sort of the highlights, the big three, as I like to call them. Does not mean that we haven't had others in the past, and it doesn't mean we won't have more in the future. We absolutely will. But let's start with these. So, oh, sorry, that's a little hard to read. Can you read that? Oh, all right. So how did we get where we are today? It's a very, very slow process. So starting in 1993, that was when the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance was enacted originally. How many of you are familiar with MWLO? That's a really good number. When I ask that question, sometimes last time I asked that question, which was about 3 days ago in one of our classes, I got 2 hands. So you guys are doing really well up here. Let's just say that. Okay, so the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance was enacted in 1993. It was updated, really a big update was in 2015. It is supposed to be updated every 5 years. The current update that is going on now is more of a restructuring and not so much an actual change to the way that it's written or any of the rules or requirements for it. But that's part of it. And then in 2009, they passed Senate Bill X77, which I think they just liked the way it sounded, to say that everybody needed to reduce, all the water agencies had to reduce their water use 20% by 2020. Just nice round numbers, sounded good. Let's go ahead and make that a thing. And we all could start working towards that. In 2014, which was around the time of what at the time we thought was the worst drought California had ever seen. We already passed it, but at the time it was the worst. We had our California Water Plan update, and that was when the governor said, all right, enough is enough. We need statewide regulation, statewide legislation to explain or to handle droughts, right? So that we are not continually in this cycle of being caught off guard by a drought, which we're not caught off guard, but we do end up having to do these sort of knee-jerk reactions to help them, to help get out of them. And so from there, we had our 2016 executive order, making conservation a California way of life. You've already heard that phrase about 6 times this morning. You hear it a lot. It became sort of the standard for water conservation in California. And it harkens exactly to what I said before. This concept of changing the way that California thinks about drought, changing the way that California thinks about water efficiency, and making it part of our lifestyle as opposed to something that we only do in times of low supply. So in 2018, that was when the implementation began for passage of SB 606 and AB 1668, which are the 2 pieces of legislation that really are making conservation a California way of life. And that's when that primer was released. It took 8 years. Was it 8? I don't know. I'm trying to block out that part of my life to get through actual rulemaking for Make Conservation a California way of life. It was a very, very long process with DWR, the State Water Resource Control Board, and many water agencies and wholesalers throughout the state to figure out exactly what that would look like. And we'll talk about what it will look like. So it actually didn't fully pass and finalize until July 3rd of 2024. In 2023, AB 1572 was passed and signed into law. That is our ban on the irrigation of non-functional turf with potable water. We'll talk about that as well. And that is the piece of legislation that Metropolitan co-sponsored and that I co-wrote, which is why I'm here today. That's why I got invited. This is my one area of expertise. And then in 2025, just January 1st of this year, the Conservation is a California Way of Life compliance reporting began. So all water agencies are currently working under that regulation, and we'll talk about that. Okay. Feel like I'm in a room where I don't have to go through this as much, but what is the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance? As I said, it was passed in 1993 and updated in 2015. It's a state regulation that's designed to prevent water from being wasted on irrigated landscapes. And it focuses solely on new and rehabilitated landscapes over 2,500 square feet. And the real trigger for MWLO is whether it requires a permit or a plan check, right? So if you don't have to do that, you don't have to follow MWLO. So how does MWLO work? It focuses on design, installation, and maintenance of landscape to a water budget, right? So this is what makes this one interesting. Again, I feel like I'm in a room where I don't have to explain this as much as I would, but the idea of a landscape budget being that once you know what plants you're putting in, what your irrigation type is, your soils, all the pieces that go along with that, you have an idea of how much water that landscape should require, right? And when you install and design and maintain that landscape, you should be able to stay underneath that water budget. And the key here on how this works, is there a, I don't think there's a pointer, but the landscape budget with a plant factor for cool season turf, as you can see, the number in red, that's the 0.8, that's the plant factor for cool season turf of 0.8. And you'll see it's just over or just under 6,000 gallons in July for cool season turf grass. Now, that same landscape size, same place, everything else being equal, if you replace that cool season turf with low water use plants with a plant factor of 0.3, now that landscape only requires about 2,200 gallons of water in the same month. So it seems like a very logical, calculated way to make sure that you're using less water, that each landscape would be using less water. What makes that work really well, assuming that it's done properly, is that you can center in on a change. Remember, water agencies, municipalities, we like numbers. So if we can say cool season turf was here and low water use plants are the same size as now here, that's a number we can look at. That's a savings that we have. That's supply we can now provide somewhere else. So it helps us with that a lot. And a lot of water agencies took that concept of water budgets and expanded it to their customers. So I don't know how much that goes on up here, but down in Southern California, there are several water agencies that have water budgets for each of their customers that they'd have to stay under that they need to stay under, or otherwise they have to pay a lot of money. And it's all based on the same idea. Of course, it does include indoor use as well, but it's this concept of figuring out based on how many people are in the home, the size, the landscape size, all of those things. This is about how much water you would need. So MWLO was designed and written, I thought, pretty well, right? So when I look at it, I think this is logical. I'm an engineer. I like things to be logical. So for me, this is logical. It makes sense. You design it the right way. What could go wrong? Well, things can go wrong. Well, for one, implementation has been spotty at best for this particular ordinance and legislation. The problem with this one, the water agencies have the biggest desire to see MWLO work correctly, right? We need those water savings. We need these landscapes to be under budget. We are not the ones who do the plan check or the permit check or who make sure that it's being done. That's not our responsibility. It's the responsibility usually of like a planning department, building, code enforcement, some version of that, usually through a city. Not all water agencies not all cities have their own water agencies, so you can already see where that crosswalk gets confusing. All right. And when that happens, when we're the ones out here talking to you as landscape professionals, we have no control over the situation or the way that MWLO is being handled in your area. And that's very difficult. So it's led to pretty low implementation. As far as I know, most planning departments, building and code departments, don't have landscape experts on staff, at least none that I've ever seen. I'm sure there are exceptions to that rule, but it's rare. And when you don't have someone who understands landscape water budgeting, who understands MWILO, that makes it even harder. The other one that's a big problem is that design and maintenance do not always match. And again, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir on this one as well, right? Many of you, I'm sure, install landscapes. Maybe you don't end up maintaining the landscapes that you install. That's the responsibility of the property owner, or they hire a maintenance contractor to do that, or it's just somebody else. And you don't really get a say on how those landscapes are maintained. You don't get a say on how they're irrigated, right? Maybe you give them a schedule in the beginning and say, this is how it should be irrigated. Here's your establishment schedule. Here's your post-establishment schedule. Best of luck, right? And then you go back a year later, 2 years later, you look at that landscape, you're like, I want to see how it looks, what I did, how's it going? And you know that it hasn't been maintained correctly because of just by looking at it. We see that a lot as well, right? And MWILO, when it's used as fact, can be caused a problem. So the assumption that because a low water use plant landscape was installed and designed to a budget does not always equal that it's maintained to that budget. And there are too often and too many regulations that assume that it is, and that causes a big problem as well. Obviously, our current MWILO standards are a bit out of date. The last big update, as I said, was in 2015. There's been a lot of technology changes, advances that have happened since then that need to be incorporated. They're not going to be incorporated this go around. Hopefully the next go around they will be, but it's a very long process. So we can't really fault DWR for how long it takes to make these kinds of changes. But the 2025 update will have a new streamlined process for easier implementation. So we are hoping that that means that that implementation percentage will get better. Okay. So let's get into the big daddy, the Making Conservation a California Way of Life regulation. This is an extremely complicated regulation, and I am not going to take you through all of it because we could do an entire day on just this regulation. So we're not going to get into all of that, but I am going to point out pieces of it that relate to the outdoor standard, which is obviously the irrigation for outdoor landscapes, and explain why that matters to you and how that impacts. So, as I said, in 2018, SB 606, AB 1668 were passed, and the State Water Resource Control Board was directed to adopt water use efficiency standards and performance measures for water suppliers. When this first passed in 2018, I don't know if you recall this, but there were a lot of news articles and false information about how you couldn't take a shower and like do laundry on the same day. I don't know where anybody got that from, but it was this whole concept of like, everyone is going to have a water budget now, and you're not going to have any water, and you have to decide what day you shower. It was a whole thing. Anyway, not true. The actual regulation is not on the individual customer. It's on the water supplier, right? So each water supplier, each water agency is held to its own water budget. And then within that budget, the water agency itself essentially decides where that water goes, right? Who's using how much? If you are a water agency that is mostly residential, makes it a little simpler. If you have a big mix of commercial, residential, maybe you have ag, a little more complicated. But again, it's on the water agency itself. And the goal of this was to help communities throughout the state adapt to California as it is, current ongoing water challenges, and trying to lessen this idea of these emergency regulations, right? Nobody can water today, or nobody can water for the next 3 months because we're in a drought. Trying to make that a thing of the past, which is a very lofty goal for a piece of legislation, let me tell you. And we'll see how that works out, but that is the idea behind it. So again, there are many pieces to the legislation and the regulation itself. We're just going to focus on the residential outdoor, or I'm sorry, just the outdoor standard, the residential and commercial version. So essentially what it does for residential properties and for commercial properties with a dedicated irrigation meter, there is a bucket or a piece of the legislation that has a number that water agencies are supposed to be held to, right? So there is a calculated residential amount of water for outdoor landscaping in the regulation. And the way that works is it is your climate information, so ETO and effective precipitation, times how much area, a certain landscape area you have in your service area for the water agency, times that landscape efficiency factor, and then times 0.62. So landscape efficiency factor is essentially a larger scale version of a plant factor. It's the same idea. Okay, so if we know what a plant factor is, we know what a landscape efficiency factor is as well. Well, there are certain landscape efficiency factors that the water agency is going to be held to, right? So that number is not a static number. It changes over time. With the idea that landscapes will become more efficient over time. How will that happen? There's only so many ways to make a landscape more efficient, right? When you want to shout one out, you have to shout though, so the people online can hear you. Scheduling. Technology. So, oh, you're going to get a gold star from our last speaker. Somebody said soil. Very nice. And Pamela. Pamela loves soil. All right. So the landscape efficiency factor, it starts at 0.8 for residential properties. That's where we're at right now. In 2035, it drops down to 0.63. And then in 2040 and on, it drops to 0.55. If you look at those pictures, that is essentially what the State Water Resource Control Board, those are landscape efficiency factors for different landscapes. That's what they think they are. Other people have other opinions, but that's what they think they are. So if we're trying to get to 0.55, can you have 3 of those pictures? Nah, you can't. So what does that essentially default you to? It defaults you to turf replacement. It defaults you to drought tolerant, water efficient landscapes. This is where we have to go for water agencies to meet this standard. So as much as we may appreciate turf, as much as we may see the value and the benefits of it, our regulations, our legislation, our policy will not allow it to exist by 2040. Good or bad? I think we have to hold questions to the end, right, Pamela? Yeah, okay, so hang on to your questions, sir. Okay. So again, and I am not saying good or bad. I am not saying, yay, I run our turf replacement program. I am not excited about that. I think people should have choice, but this is where we're at. And I think that's something that we all have to understand as we move forward, right? Water agencies will be held to this lower number, which means they will be doing everything they can to get all of you as their contractors, professionals, customers to reduce and rid of as much turf as possible, because it's really the only way to meet this. The only exceptions for that, there are some special landscape areas. Those are exceptions, pools, spas, any areas that are dedicated solely to edible plants. So if they have a garden, obviously that's not part of it as well. And then recycled water remains an exception. I'm going to talk about the future of recycled water when we get to the end. For commercial outdoor water use, it's essentially the same idea. This is dedicated irrigation meters. So if there is no dedicated irrigation meter, if you have a park, a school, an HOA, whatever it may be on a mixed use meter, that's a separate category. Over a certain size, you do need to switch to a dedicated irrigation meter. So you'll be seeing that as well. But for properties that are on dedicated irrigation meters, it is the same concept, right? The same calculations, and we're still looking at that landscape efficiency factor. So what is it for commercial? What are those numbers? Pretty similar when we start, but in 2040, you'll notice that instead of 0.55, we've moved to 0.45. So it's even lower for commercial properties, public properties, right? So if you can't meet 0.55 on a residential property, how hard is it going to be to meet 0.45 for a commercial property? The concept being that commercial properties require less functional turf, depending on what it is, right? That they have fewer restrictions or needs for what types of plants they put in, and therefore they should be able to make that adjustment. It's a lofty goal, again, and something that water agencies are going to have to push, which means it will be falling back onto you as landscape contractors, landscape professionals to make that happen. Commercial has the same special landscape areas, pools, recycled water, active recreation, of course, edible plants, and then cemeteries always get a pass, good or bad. Again, I don't know how everybody feels about that, but cemeteries always get a pass. People want to have grass everywhere in a cemetery. Okay. So as I said, you do need to install dedicated irrigation meters or have a different kind of technology. So by 2039, if you are currently managing, installing a landscape over a ½ acre, it will need to have a dedicated irrigation meter. If you're not able to put one in, there are some other in lieu technologies. And one of the in lieu technologies I want to point out, does it have a thing? The first one, that water budget-based rate structure, right? We're back to water budgets. Everything is based on this concept of water budgets. We're back to MWELO. We're back to that landscape efficiency factor and making sure that we're staying under budget in our landscapes. There's no way around it, even if in this regulation, right? At some point, your landscapes, your properties are going to be held to that water budget for outdoor use, and it needs to hit those lower amounts. So even if you're on a mixed use meter, you're still going to be held to a water budget, or possibly could be held to a water budget if that's the way your agency decides to go. Okay. So Conservation of California Way, as I said, it took almost 8 years to put that thing together. We're 2 months in. It's February. We're 2 months in. So we don't know what will happen yet. We don't know how effective this will be. We do know that the way that it's written, water agencies have said over and over again, this is going to be really hard to do. We're going to do our best, but there's going to be some learning periods. There's probably going to be some bumps along the way as we figure this out. Many water agencies are still in the phase of understanding how far off they are from their full standard, right? So there is one big number that they have to meet. And how far away are they from that one big number? Some of them are good, done. We already meet that number. We're ready to go. Now they just have to worry about when that number ratchets down in 2035 and 2040. Some are already far away from that number and are trying to figure out right now, scrambling to figure out how they can reduce that much water that quickly from their customers. And they're going to make different decisions. We could see a lot more budget-based rates. We could see a lot more, we could see more programs for direct install turf removal. We could see all sorts of things. Those are all decisions that will be coming out as we figure out how to implement this regulation. Unfortunately, a lot of the data that was used to develop the regulation is already out of date. It was from 2018 to 2020 when we first started trying to figure out how to implement this. And there's not really plans to update it. So we're not working with great data to begin with, unless a water agency has the ability to make their own data. And one of the big issues and why we talk about it with all of you is because in order to meet those goals, we need customer participation, right? We cannot, or have not at least so far, tried mandated changes, right? It's very hard to go up to somebody's house and say, hey, I know you like your grass and you've got kids and you've got a dog and everybody wants it, but you're gonna have to take it out, right? We don't want to do that. We've never done that in the past. The closest we get is those 2-day-a-week watering. That's the closest we get to those kinds of mandates. But if we can't get customer participation, if we can't people to voluntarily make these changes and we can't meet those numbers, that might be coming. We get desperate enough, who knows what's going to happen. And that's something we'll have to see. And there definitely needs to be a review of these implementation successes and challenges, because again, we don't know. Oh, goodness. Oh, in 5 minutes? Okay, I got to talk faster. All right. AB 1572, this is my baby. And if you hate it, I'm sorry. I won't take all the credit. So let's just say this. I didn't write the whole thing. AB 1572 was co-sponsored by Metropolitan and signed into law in 2023. It bans the irrigation of non-functional turf with potable water on CII properties only. Okay, so this does not impact residential at all. It also excludes cemeteries, again, they get that pass, and multifamily housing. There's a lot of confusion between what's the difference between multifamily housing and HOAs, because HOAs are included and multifamily housing is not. If you have a common interest development or an HOA, you are an HOA. If you do not, if it is an apartment building, low income housing, non-HOA property, you are included as multifamily housing. That's the difference. The reason behind that, multifamily housing that we are focusing on have a lot of non-traditional green space that people will use for recreation. Kids will play on it. Normally, you wouldn't think they would, but they do, and we don't want to take that away. There's also an exception for tree health. So if your grass is on the same valve as a tree that we want to keep, you can keep irrigating that grass to keep that tree alive. Although ideally, you would separate it so you can water the tree and then not the grass. There's a lot of questions about how did we define non-functional turf? Well, we kind of cheated and took from Southern Nevada Water Authority, because what they did was that they defined functional turf and said non-functional turf is everything else. And we said, you know what? That's a good idea. So what is functional turf? It's turf located in a recreational use area or a community gathering space. So it's this idea of using the turf for something, right? It's where you have concerts. It's where you have kids playing. It's where you do picnics, meetings, whatever that may be, functional. If you are mowing it, walking across it to get to a door, non-functional. Pretty basic idea. I know there's a lot of nuance in there. We absolutely understand there's a lot of nuance in there, but those are the basic ideas between the two. So what's the timeline? For January 2027, that's when it begins. That's all non-DAC public properties. So public agencies are going first, right? We're not going to make any private property owners do something that the public probably hasn't already done. So if they are in a non-disadvantaged community area, they have to turn off their irrigation first. Then in January 2028, it moves to CII properties. January 2029 is when the HOAs come into play. And in January 2031, that's disadvantaged public properties. The one thing I want to point out, January 2028, all CII properties. That means even if you are in a disadvantaged community, you still have to comply in 2028. That DAC versus non-DAC only applies to public property. So that's the distinction that most people miss, and I want to make sure you catch. For property owners, they do have to do self-certification by 2030. That's basically you saying this is how much functional turf I have, how much non-functional turf I have, and I've turned it off, promise. In January 2027, by January 2027, all water suppliers, municipalities, cities will have put something, an ordinance in their codes saying that you cannot irrigate NFT with potable water, right? So it now becomes not just a state law, but a local law as well. And I'm going to skip over these. These are just some examples of non-functional turf. Very nice. Very nice. Okay. For AB 1572, we do understand that there's more direction that's needed on the difference between functional and non-functional turf. There's a lot of nuance. We're aware of that. Hopefully the State Water Resource Control Board is going to work with us on that. There's a lot of confusion on who's responsible for enforcing it, whether it's the local municipalities, cities, water agencies, or the state. We're waiting on that too. And of course, we understand and have heard all the environmental concerns about turning off irrigation and just letting a whole bunch of grass die. The idea is that hopefully people won't do that, that they'll replace it with drought tolerant landscaping. Understand that that is a cost, and so not everybody will do that right away. And that the cheaper thing to do would be to take it all out and replace it with rock or mulch and nothing else. We are fully aware of that concern, and hopefully we'll be doing our best to make sure that doesn't happen. And we are hoping that we will also be able to partner with a statewide program for more funding, particularly in DAC areas, to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, so what's possibly next? Possibly. Nobody latch on to any of these. These are just things that are being discussed. So one piece that went through and failed was what's a native plant legislation, or addition to MWILO, basically requiring a certain amount of native plants on new and rehabilitated landscapes. That did not pass the last time around. It could come back, so we may see that more of that. The reason it doesn't pass, or it didn't pass, one of the other concerns was that there aren't enough native plants in nurseries and not enough availability to make that work. We'll see where that goes. One that is very contentious but comes up over and over again is the idea of retrofit upon resale. Basically, when you sell your house, you have to take the turf out and replace it. Right? Not popular, but again, if we get that far, it could be a mandate. And you could also see turf replacement mandates for CII and, excuse me, statewide water budgets. Okay, see, I went as fast as I could. Sorry about that. Woo, a lot of information. But I'm
Thank you.
happy. Do we have time for questions?
Yes, we do. Yes, we have a few minutes for questions. Thank you so much. We're going to reverse course this time. And if we have a question from our online audience first, we'll go there.
Oh, yes. So let me just get it so I can read it here. Here. Essentially, the question is, well, first of all, I'm combining two questions. So the first one is there a carve out for synthetic turf, or is synthetic turf addressed directly? And a corollary to that is, what keeps parcel owners from removing grass and just replacing it with hardscape, essentially, even if it's permeable, but it's hardscape instead of living plants?
Okay, good questions. One is that there is a statewide movement away from artificial turf, synthetic turf. There are too many environmental concerns, health concerns related to it. So I can't think of a single turf replacement program that allows it anymore, or rebates it as we used to in the past. Certainly people still have freedom of choice. They can make that choice. We would encourage them not to, but we can't stop somebody, unfortunately. And then in terms, the same thing with the idea of a ground cover. If you're doing a turf replacement program, there are usually plant requirements, plant count requirements, density requirements that don't allow that to happen. But we can't stop somebody from doing something on their own as much as we'd like to.
There are thankfully some good incentives
Mhm.
monetarily for putting in plants. Did you want to add to that, Pamela?
I have a second question. I just wanted to jump on it now.
I only get one.
And it has to do with the LEF. I forget what all the acronyms stand
Landscape
for.
efficiency factor?
Yes, the landscape efficiency factors. So to be clear, if we were calculating gallons for a particular parcel or parcels, it would be evapotranspiration rate, whichever one we're using, minus effective precipitation. So it's an adjusted evapotranspiration rate
Right,
that the LEF is being applied to.
right.
So this is actually very aggressive
Yes.
for the actual gallons applied to or able to be applied to a landscape.
Yes, it's very aggressive, particularly because of the inclusion of effective precipitation. Because we can't, even if we see how much precipitation occurred in a certain area, making assumptions about how much of it actually made it onto the landscape and was retained is a whole separate story. So it's very aggressive.
So it actually creates incentive for more soil building and precipitation retention on the property.
It does. Yes.
Thank you. Question from the audience right here. I'll give you the microphone.
On the water budget part, is that, you know, would a commercial landscaper, you know, has a bunch of projects, would they have a budget that was actually given to them, you know, just by the whatever, you know, the agency? Because right now, I don't think they get a budget unless they have an audit done or something. Is that something that would be given so that they could see where they are?
Yeah.
You know?
It's certainly one possibility that that's where we're going to end up, particularly with commercial, having water budgets for commercial properties exclusively. And that would be given by the water agency, the water supplier.
Okay, next question we have from the audience in the back.
Krista, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the interplay between 1572, the non-functional turf, and MWILO. So does it, one thing that I've run into in trying to figure it out is that if a site has to replace its turf over, say, 2,500 square feet of turf, does it then become subject to requiring it to get an MWILO?
If it requires a permit or a plan check, then it does. Yeah, so that would fall in that rehabilitated category, and then it would require it.
It would require.
Yeah.
So there's going to be like thousands and thousands of properties, right, that are changing out their turf by 1572, which will trigger MWILOs?
If they trigger that permitting check, yes. Then if they were trigger that permit, yes.
Oh, okay. And the other one was that self-certification part that's going to creep up. Do you have any idea what that means?
So it will be a form, and it will be a form. We don't have exactly what the template of that form will be, but it's basically going to ask you your square footage, what's your total functional areas, total non-functional areas, and then you'll have to certify whether or not you've turned off the irrigation. And if you haven't, you'll have to explain why not. So if you have trees or whatever other reasoning there may be, so that they can evaluate that. Again, since we don't know who's enforcing exactly yet, we don't, if you put in and say, I'm saying I have this much turf, and your water supplier who's down the road knows that you have more than that, that could trigger them coming to your property and saying, well, I don't know if your form's correct. If the state's doing it, less likely that that's going to happen.
I wonder if at some point they'll come up with a diameter or something that qualifies a person to irrigate a tree. What is that space of irrigation? That could be highly debatable.
It is. Unfortunately, right now it's just based on what's on the same valve and how that works, but it would be ideal.
Yeah, because you could have a valve watering one tree in a whole bunch of other areas.
We did try to put in the language that you actually had to separate trees onto their own valves, but that didn't go very far.
Okay. I think we have a question. Is it an online question? No. Okay. It's in the back there.
Hey, Krista.
Hi, Kristen.
Hi. So we continue at EVMUD to struggle with just getting people to schedule correctly, both residential and commercial properties. And I'm kind of curious, when we look at, I think it was 58% of the water is used in the landscape on your chart. If we were to think, like, if we imagined a perfect world, everyone's scheduling correctly and just turning their clocks or turning on their water budget and turning on their rain gauge, do we have a sense of how much water we would save and how much that would reduce that piece of the pie?
So our estimations at Metropolitan, based on the studies that we've done, show anywhere from a 17 to a 30% decrease in water use if irrigated correctly.
Right.
Scheduling properly, irrigating to the budget based on the plants and all of that, you'd see up to 30% of a reduction, which is great, which would be a huge number.
That would be a huge number.
And
Yeah.
as part of that, just a note, the native plant landscaping legislation that failed included a requirement for water efficient irrigation and proper scheduling. So there was language in that bill that Metropolitan wrote as well that tried to make that a mandate, tried to make part of it, but the whole bill failed. So that didn't make it in. Maybe someday we can separate it, but yeah, we did try.
Okay, looks like we have just about 30 seconds to a minute left. Do we have one last very quick question?
Yeah, can I follow up on that? So if the MWILO back in 1993, it seemed like a lot of the motivation of that was to minimize turf in the landscape and the way that the settings of what you had to do. Now that turf is out of play with 1572, is MWILO's importance diminish because of that?
That's a really good question. I wouldn't say that MWILO isn't important. Actually, it became more important with the conservation as a California way of life regulation because a lot of that hinges on MWILO. So it's actually more important than it used to be. But AB 1572 does preclude that allowance for turf that you can budget in MWILO. So the expectation is that the next update will include that same idea of, well, now you can't install new turf at all because you can't water it anyway.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
All right.
Thank you. Before I introduce our final speaker, we're going to see what you think about this one last Cahoots question. Which of these items is not considered a nature-based solution? Okay, we nailed this one. Stimulating plant growth with fertilizers. That is the correct answer. That is not a nature-based solution at all. I think we were all paying attention to that first presentation. I'm now going to move in and introduce our next and last speaker for the day, Ms. Story Wiggins from Terremoto. Story Wiggins is a landscape architect with a background in historic preservation and land stewardship. Her intuitive approach to design varies by project, but aims always to honor the land, exercise restraint, and allow for evolution. Story received a master's in landscape architecture from UC Berkeley and a BA in historic preservation and French from the College of Charleston. She has lived and studied abroad in Paris and Rome, where she was inspired by how cities are brought to life when public space is valued and tended. She joined Terremoto's San Francisco office in 2016, where she leads projects of various scales and types. Story is also the co-lead of Terremoto's Land and Labor Internal Working Group, which advocates for the building and gardening trades and tradespeople that make these landscape projects possible. Ms. Wiggins, please come up to the front and go ahead.
Yeah. Does that sound okay? Everyone can hear me? Yep. Great. Okay, so it's really nice to be here. Always nice to chat with a new group of people. We do not have all the answers, but I think we are thinking very critically and a lot about how to kind of imagine what the sort of garden for the next civilization looks like. There are all these regulations happening, which are great, but can also be a little frustrating when you're a designer and you're trying to like make your idea of a garden fit into these new legislations. And I think our way forward is like, we kind of have to start from scratch and really reimagine our relationship to land, our relationship to design. And so that's kind of what we're attempting to do. A little bit of context about who we are, just so you know. We were founded in 2012 by David Godshall on the left and Alan Peroy on the right. They met working together at Surface Design, which is a landscape architecture firm in San Francisco, and they struck out on their own to just do things a little differently, kind of try to experiment a bit with some ideas that they had through built work. And since they founded the company, we've grown a little bit. We're now kind of hovering around 30 people. We have 8 people in the San Francisco office and everyone else is down in Los Angeles. And we kind of split the state. We generally work in the Bay Area, down to SLO and up to the north of California from this office. Our work is largely residential. That's our bread and butter. And I think that's not why I got into landscape architecture necessarily, but I've really come to love it as a place to kind of test out ideas, build things quickly, interface with clients. There's a lot of fun to be had there. We are starting to get some more institutional work, which is lovely, so everyone can enjoy the spaces that we design. And we also do a fair bit of hospitality, wineries, hotels, restaurants, that kind of thing. We do make drawings, we email, we spend a lot of time on Zoom, but our favorite part of the job, and I think a very important part of our work, is that we love to spend time on site, really getting to know the land and getting to know the clients and the people who build our projects as well. So that's kind of a core part of our ethos and makes the job pretty fun. And we also spend a lot of time together, not necessarily designing, but just sort of communing, talking, doing pro bono projects together. And I think that builds a really nice bond and strengthens the work as well. So this picture is not even from the most recent fires, but obviously this is a big part of the landscape today. We are interfacing with big climate change and other issues that are coming to the fore and forcing us to reckon with them. And we really feel like it's, we can't solve the world or, fix all the problems, but we do have a role to play in kind of changing people's ideas about how to interact with land. So we obviously all come, or many of us come with the kind of baggage of the American dream, which was kind of maybe founded in the 50s and honestly hasn't changed that much since then, shockingly. But as we all know, I think it's just not a sustainable way of living, nor is it particularly fulfilling in my opinion and some other people's opinions. So we are trying to sort of reimagine, like in the absence of that, what kind of can fill its place. Again, here's kind of like still today, we're living in places that look like this, where actually they should look a bit more like the native landscapes that are surrounding them in terms of like giving to us emotionally and physically, but also giving back to like wildlife and being water wise and all that. It's sort of a holistic approach that we're trying to take. So again, don't have all the answers, but we do spend time thinking about this. Every year we get together, the two offices, and kind of think about how we, like this very tiny landscape architecture firm, can kind of do a little better in our work and world. And one way that we're doing that is kind of going back to the very basics. This is our working definition of a garden, which is what we think of as our role. We design gardens. A garden is a human-led curation of materials and beings built and maintained with labor on the medium of land through time. So kind of breaking it down into that very basic thing, we can kind of unpack our relationship to each part of this definition. And I'm going to kind of go through most of these today, but we didn't have time for time. So that's just going to run through all of them. Material. So thinking kind of, this is focusing today on planting design kind of, because that's a bit what this summit is about. We obviously do other types of design, but focusing on planting here today. So plants as material. The first way we think about using plants as landscape architects is shapers of space. I think we've all had the experience probably of walking into a redwood grove, and it just makes you look up and kind of go, I think plants have a real ability to like connect us to time, to deeper relationships with the earth, and we kind of love to play with that. What does it mean to step into this weird circle of a puntia cactus? Trees obviously have an amazing ability to change the landscape. On the left is kind of a before image. On the right, the sort of in-process creation of a grove. And then here it is, within the year from that, and really creating a space to be in and feel part of. I would say the best tree is always a mature tree that's already on site. So sometimes you have to bring in the trees, but if you have existing mature trees, we would always want to try to keep those. And sometimes planting can kind of erase boundaries, property lines, push out into the landscape and give people a sense that they're part of their context. We kind of put up fences and cut the landscape into these little tiny rectangles, but actually there's a lot of magic to be found in just expanding out into this broader landscape. We also try to have a bit of fun with planting design, and sometimes that comes from juxtaposing unexpected things. You know, yes, this has a small patch of turf in the yard, and so we're offsetting that by, you know, making the rest of the garden extremely xeric and kind of like full of weird architectural plantings. We're really lucky here in the Bay Area, I think, to be able to grow like almost anything. So there's kind of a joy in smashing things together that you wouldn't actually regularly see together. Agaves with roses and tree ferns. It's sort of playful and weird and fun. What does it mean to design a Japanese garden, but in the California context and within our sort of climatic limitations, I guess you could say. I think there's a lot of interesting things to be done with playing with those dynamics. What does it mean to design an English border garden with a native California palette? And I think it's worth acknowledging here that in the work that we do produce a lot of waste. Construction is really tough. You know, even the idea of everyone taking out their turf and throwing it away, there's just a lot of waste inherent in bringing in a whole bunch of new plants, all come in plastic pots, all were raised in a nursery with a lot of water put into them. You know, we kind of are still wrestling with some of the negative externalities that just are inherent to the way we work. And I think, you know, we haven't solved it, but I think it's worth just kind of recognizing and kind of keeping eyes open to different ways of working. So plants as material, you know, even that concept is a little bit problematic because, of course, plants are not material. They're living beings. They each are individuals and they'll react as such. I'm sure you've all had the experience. So we're trying to think a bit more about plants in that way. They're not just interchangeable units, and we should treat them with respect. So I'm going to walk through a couple projects to kind of show how we're working with plants as beings. This is out near Yosemite, a beautiful building in a pretty wild landscape. And this is essentially just to illustrate that sometimes the best thing to do is very little. So we did do a plan drawing because I think sometimes people expect plans, you know, that's what they hire you for. But really what we wanted to say is that there wasn't much that needed to happen. And you can kind of see the gentleness of this approach in these kind of before after very simple renderings. So all we're suggesting to do here is to kind of formalize the deer path, add some color to the meadow, kind of clarify views. Here, just inserting a bench to kind of take in the landscape and adding again a bit of wildflowers into the meadow. And when you're working in this way, you're not completely starting from scratch and, you know, replacing a landscape in whole. We find it's really nice to work with very small plants because they adapt quickly. They don't necessarily need to be irrigated. It's sort of a restoration approach. If you can plant in fall, they will usually thrive. And if they don't, it's less of a loss because you just spent a little bit of money on that tiny little plant. So that's what we did here. You can see the tiny little babies in their cages. And then within a year, it had completely filled in and really created a beautiful space. And then we also, you know, in the meadow context, wanted to just add a little bit of seasonal interest and color. So we actually were using seed harvested from within the watershed, which is something that we like to do because it preserves the biodiversity of that area. So that's sort of like the natural unit in which plants cross-pollinate and have adapted very specifically to the local ecology. So Sometimes this is done by hand, sometimes it's done by a consultant. You can usually find restoration groups who will hand collect seed for you. You should only collect 10% of seed from any single plant so that it can still function. And then you could either have these contract grown or simply overseed into the existing meadow. And it's just, there is something magical about like this little tiny object has so much potential to like really change the way a landscape looks with very little effort. So that's something that's gentle and lovely, and we've had good experience with. This project is a bit weird. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I like it because it kind of points toward what a garden could look like, what ideas of beauty could kind of move toward if we're really thinking about landscapes in sort of a new way. It's an urban plot in Los Angeles, and it was basically just nothing, you know, some sad grass and a few invasive plants when we started working there. And we worked with an artist and the community to basically slowly over time and very iteratively create a community space. And so it's sort of like bringing in plants that were interesting to people or meant something to people, bringing in kind of urban detritus, building the soil through these kind of ritualistic composting sessions, creating space and habitat for wildlife. So on the left, that's a wildlife pile. In the middle, a crow pole. Sometimes we'll do like owl boxes or different like other bird habitat in this way. And on the right, some folks creating a little seasonal water feature. So it's just clay that creates a place where water will stay, which is great for wildlife. And so it has kind of become this incredibly rich and strange place that people come to have all kinds of events. And I think because it's sort of it's constantly changing, looks different than other places, it also opens people up to kind of inhabit it in different and unusual ways. You know, it is in LA, so of course they're always doing weird things down there, but I still think there's something to the fact that spaces that look different might allow people to also interact with them differently. And like most importantly, kids love it. It's like full of all these nooks and crannies and things to discover, and just has so much more interest than a typical like clearly defined and designed landscape. So that's kind of an interesting case study. This is something a bit closer to home. This project is in Los Gatos, and when we arrived, it looked pretty sad. The clients were really interested in transforming it, and even though everyone else on their street just has turf and clipped hedges in their yard, they were open to doing something different. So we went with them on that. My colleague Sarah had this vision of like an incredible pollinator garden in the front and as well as in the back. And so that's kind of the vision that led the design. She brought together a group of plants that were not necessarily all native, but all low water, different textures and colors, getting the client really excited about the color palette and the shapes of the flowers, and thinking about how they will kind of pop up and recede over the seasons. And it was a great success. It was actually featured in Gardens Illustrated, and the clients really love it. You can see on the left, there are some like unique architectural moments, kind of little fun details, but the big kind of impact of the space is really the planting. And what's next? Oh. yeah, I think you can see here that it's just a huge presence and a huge change from what it was. And yeah, they have 2 little girls and they absolutely love gathering flowers and kind of wandering through the garden. So next, I don't know how I'm doing on time. Oh, oh wow, okay. I'm like rushing because I was like, I think this is too long, but maybe I can slow down a little. Land. So plants in relation to land. I think there is something really special about being in the Bay where you kind of do have plants from all over the world. You can have fun just designing from wherever. But there's also something really meaningful and powerful about designing places that speak to their context. And I think from like a spiritual perspective, there's something really important about that as well. So this project was kind of about listening to the land and what it wanted to be. It's a beautiful ground up house, kind of an intense construction. And when we first started looking at the site, we were looking kind of from a really zoomed out perspective. And I think that this was a good move here because you can see on this diagram on the right that the site is, well, it's a little hard to see, but there's kind of the 2 red lines and the site is right in the middle of that, and it's in an alluvial fan. But driving around in the neighborhood, you wouldn't necessarily know that. It's kind of like the scale is a little too large to really comprehend at the human scale. So it was good to kind of look at the map and say, okay, actually, I think even though we're in Ojai, it might be okay to have some sort of like water loving plants that are also native and adapted to dry periods. So the project, again, was like pretty hard on the context, as construction often is. It was basically a big open area when we landed. But we were seeing these kind of hints that there was like a riparian influence, right? There's egrets flying around. And so the way the landscape was set up, the building is really tucked into kind of a shelf, and the part in the front is higher. So it's kind of like up on a ridge, and then the backyard is more low, closer to the water table. And so that helped kind of guide our planting design as we went through. Kind of on the left, this is more putting in like a chaparral, a little bit drier of a landscape typology, and then on the right, going for more of a wet meadow. And so you can see we're starting really, really small little plugs for the meadow, but it very quickly came together. Wow, that looks a little funny. We did pay a lot of attention to hydro zoning on this project. So there also was a gray water aspect. So we wanted to make sure that the gray water was going to plants that could handle it. Not all natives love gray water. So we were being very careful about that orientation. And then this is kind of that upper, more chaparral oriented planting design. Looks very native, looks very dry. And down below, also all natives, but has this really lush feeling, and actually with very little additional water. And it's, yeah, vibrant and full of wildlife. And we also were able to save this incredible heritage tree, which was kind of struggling and surrounded by invasive plants. Working with an arborist, we kind of like removed all the invasives and gave it some room to kind of reestablish its relationship with the hydrology of the site. And that's always feels really good. So this next one is also kind of far afield. It's in Denver, Colorado. We tend not to work much outside of California or our immediate environs, but this felt like an opportunity we didn't want to miss. It was, we basically were brought in to redesign a very sad mid-century plaza, you know, in winter especially sad. And the developer was really cool and open to do something a little different. So we said, what if we try to bring the surrounding plains and environment and kind of material culture from outside the city right into the center? And so that's what we did. And in order to do that, we really had to go out into it and sort of take pictures of what it looks like, find the quarries that were quarrying this kind of beautiful red rock that, you know, everyone talks about in Denver, kind of inspect the surrounding environments and get to know the different ecosystems in the area through talking to people, working with local nurseries, and then start to imagine how that would play out over the seasons. This was the site plan that was developed. So really, you know, it is a place also for people, but it didn't need to be so vast. So we are making space for cafe tables, food trucks, different seating nooks, but also kind of bringing in big enough swaths of planting to make it feel really green and wild. And we were also kind of trying to design for some of these birds of prey that might kind of actually be living in the city. And there is now a hawk that is like nesting in the roof of a nearby building and is spotted a lot kind of hunting in this zone. So that's pretty amazing. It is on structure, which is always a challenge, but we were able to kind of build up soil in mounds to kind of give root space to plants, which also helps to create these feelings of enclosure, and put trees and things over the deeper areas where we had good soil depth. Yeah, and it's really feels very green, feels very different from the surrounding landscapes. And I think the way that people have reacted to it kind of makes us think that maybe people are more ready for these different types of landscapes than we give them credit for. I think a lot of times we're like, oh, it's a public project, it needs to look a certain way or make people feel comfortable in a certain way. But I think maybe we can push people a little bit, or, you know, bring them along, and they're gonna, you know, stop and smell the roses essentially. Yeah, and so it is also a space, you know, it's a great space for people, but I guess as you can see in the photo on the right, it is also habitat and space for animals as well when it's not being used by humans. So yeah, one other thing about our work is that we do really kind of engage and interface with the idea of labor in our designs and in the way we work. You know, from the time I started, basically, I was taught to kind of defer to the people building the projects on certain things, which I think is a different type of relationship that is typical with designers sometimes. We really believe that the people building and maintaining landscapes have incredible embodied knowledge about how to do things, what works and doesn't work. And we work very directly with them to kind of design build, in a sense, a lot of the parts of our projects. And we find that it really keeps projects kind of lively and awake to sight and awake to what's going to work and what's not. So we do have, as was mentioned, we have this Land and Labor Initiative and Working Group. We also work closely with Michelle Franco, who's a professor at the Ohio State University, She puts out a lot of kind of articles and teaches new upcoming designers about these topics. And I think I'm very hopeful that it might transform our field in positive ways. I think we're going to need people willing and valued to work in the landscape even more, you know, with these legislations, with climate change. That kind of work is just going to become more important and deserves its due. And also, it's always important to think about ongoing maintenance of projects. As I'm sure you all know, we love to like bring on a gardener, have a ongoing conversation with gardeners and maintainers after our project is built. And we find that like, yeah, the day the project is finished for us is like the first day of the garden's life, and it will continue to evolve and change through time. And we try to make space for that. It's really hard as a designer because I think we're taught to kind of have one concept of what a landscape should look like, but it never is that in my experience anyway. I also think it's worth talking a bit about client interactions. So sometimes it can be hard to bring people along for creating landscapes that look a bit different, that aren't what they grew up with, that kind of challenge their ideas about a beautiful space. So I don't know if this is the best project to talk about that, but it has a little aspect of that. So this is a Frank Lloyd Wright house that was designed and built in 1923. A pretty special opportunity to get to work on it. It's in Hollywood. And it was being restored. And the house was kind of designed with this idea of like a magical, real Hanging Gardens of Babylon kind of garden around it that, you know, related out to the hills, but it hadn't really panned out that way. So we said, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to really lean into bringing the kind of wildness of the feral Los Angeles hills into this garden. And so that's kind of, this is the sort of imagery we were looking at and kind of selling them on. And in this context, it really worked well. I think the house was set up for that. So it wasn't a huge battle to get the design installed. And as it was growing in, you know, things started growing together, kind of filling in, seeming a bit wild. And, you know, we're kind of talking the whole time about making space for wildlife in the garden. On the right, this is kind of like, you know, that water feature that is there for birds and butterflies, and kind of trying to bring that new layer of interest and excitement to the garden. And over time, we were kind of like revisiting for our stewardship visits. And my colleague Hannah noticed that some of the plants were looking a little bit bitten and eaten. And luckily, she kind of took a step back and wasn't like, oh my God, there's a pest, we need to cut these plants out. She realized that this was actually a host plant for the American lady butterfly. And so what she was seeing was their process of like, they had, you know, hatched as caterpillars and were eating down the plant. And so we kind of decided, okay, you know, we need to sort of like let the client know that this is going to look bad for a certain portion of the year. She started documenting what that was going to look like and kind of bringing them along for the outcome and making them feel invested in this sort of journey and habitat creation. And ultimately, you know, they were kind of okay and excited about the possibility of having, yeah, a little American lady butterfly habitat. But also once you start looking at that scale, you start to see a ton of things. Like, I think we're not so used to kind of zoning in and looking at that tiny scale for kind of signs and hints of life. And once you do and start celebrating those, I think there's kind of a lot there to sell people on. And ultimately, we are also, of course, just trying to make it a little bit cool to be messy and weird and wild. And I think that there is a big potential for that to be, I think it will start to make its way into the kind of mainstream over time. It will take time, and it's not for everyone. I think it's like not for everyone and for all parts of a project, but certainly there should be space within any landscape that's kind of given over to a bit of wildness, a bit of messiness. We as humans take up a lot of space, so it's nice to kind of give a little bit back. How are we doing? Okay. So I think this is the last project I'm going to talk about. We have a little pro bono kind of R&D project called Test Plot. It is many things. It's now also a nonprofit. And the idea is basically just that there are a ton of uncared for public spaces. I'm sure you've noticed, like, municipalities do not have enough manpower, womanpower, money to take care of all of the public spaces in this country, world, state. So we kind of had the idea of like basically a ground up restoration project. And the whole concept was, how can we do the most with the least input? Because of course we don't have incredibly deep pockets, but we wanted to see what we could make happen. So initially the test plots started in Elysian Park in LA. We now have 2, maybe 3 up here as well. And the first ones were the design was kind of oriented around the radius of a sprinkler, a like standard Home Depot sprinkler system. So kind of we fenced in that little amount of area, set up our sprinkler, and planted in some native plants. In that process, we learned a lot about, needing to sheet mulch beforehand. I think we already knew that, but you have to like learn it by doing sometimes, which is what this process is all about. I think as designers, sometimes there's this huge gap between we go to school, we learn how to do things in the computer. Some of my, very young colleagues had never put a plant in the ground in their life. It's like we need to kind of bridge that gap and understand what it means to build landscapes, maintain landscapes. I think that will only help us be better designers. And so, yeah, it is a community project. It brings together different people who maybe don't have a yard, who want a little chance to get to know native plants, who want to kind of meet their neighbors and spend time with their families. And yeah, we just have work days, we weed, we water, we install, and then weed again. But honestly, what we've been able to accomplish is pretty incredible. It goes from just annual grasses that go tawny and then are green, go tawny and are green. And now we have these spaces that are like very much more vibrant and full of life and bringing people together in the process and for very little input. So I think sometimes, when we're thinking about making landscape changes, we have a very specific idea of what that needs to be and how it can be done. But there are kind of a few more kind of grassroots or rustic ways of working that give back a lot. I think I'll skip this. And I'm just going to end there with our kind of idea about what beauty could be in the future, and hopefully take some questions and comments.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We do have time for a few questions. I see one question over there.
Hi, this is in regards to the urban community space that you design and installed and maintain. Who owns that property and who paid for all of that work and the maintenance of it?
Oh, right. Sorry. Okay, so it is owned by a landlord and it's basically, he still owns it. He just kind of gave us permission to work there. So in a sense, it's like a temporary landscape because at any time he could say, oh, I want to build like a whatever apartment building here. But I think it was a space that had been just for years and years and years derelict and empty. And so there are spaces like that, of course. We see them all around. And so it was just finding that person, asking permission, and he happened to say yes. In terms of who paid for it, so it was a partnership between our office and this artist, David Horowitz, and we've both contributed money of our own, and he's also done like fundraising events and things like that. But yeah, it is, in a sense, it's like a pro bono project of ours. Yeah, but it's like very little, pretty low input. Again, it's like you can do a lot if you don't mind how it looks when you start.
Well, and we find our aesthetics, they evolve.
Exactly.
Along with it. I'm going to check in with our online audience and see if we have a question there.
We don't have a question yet from the online audience, but I have a question from me.
Perfect.
I'm wondering, Story, if you could maybe talk about dig in a little bit more into the design process, the design and installation process of a landscape that is less tamed and more native plants and so forth, and more combinations, more density, and how that maybe how within that design process you are taking into consideration things like water usage and so forth. So how do those, very kind of regulatory sort of requirements for doing evaluating projects, how does that fit into the design process and communicating it with the installation team and also with the clients? Does it come up or not? Is it just aesthetic or?
No, I mean, it's not just aesthetic. I think everything we do is kind of based in an ethos that we just have about wanting to be sustainable and not just in a sort of a greenwashing way. That said, we still do things that, for whatever reason aren't the most responsible. Like it's really hard to always do the right thing. But I think from a baseline perspective, it's maybe a bit easier because we're just sort of interested in working that way. And so we generally start from wanting to bring in a bunch of natives and wanting to work with low water plants. I think, we're a pretty young firm, and perhaps that contributes to the fact that like all of us went through school at a time when that was part of the conversation. And, it's kind of in our generation to be thinking about these things. How to actually do it is another thing, right? It's like you have to learn new ways of working. But I will say, I mean, I know occasionally MWELO or other, okay, we love to not permit projects because it's a lot of work. So that's one thing. Like if we cannot, we will not, because it is a lot of work, and it's like I feel like we want to do the right thing anyway. Obviously, like if we have to permit projects because they're in a certain area or they're a certain size, we will do that. But we tend to not run into a ton of issues because we're already using low water plants and we're already using natives. Like, I don't know, I just feel like it makes it a lot easier to not be fighting, I don't know. I don't know what to say. Like we usually, you know, if we're going to do a high water use area, it is very small on a project. And so I think we don't run into a ton of issues with that kind of thing. But just like getting through permitting is, whew, you know, there's always comments. Thanks, but go ahead.
Yeah. Yes. Next question.
I saw the really nice projects you have there, you know, like the wow look and everything else. Now, my question is, people who have the ability to maintain these, you know, the look, the natural look of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see a lot of gardeners out there that knows how to keep it up.
Yeah.
Because it's up looking beautiful. 1 year, you come by, you look at it again, it looks like somebody came in with a butcher knife and destroyed everything that you maintain.
Yeah.
And then I'm also thinking about some like the projects you have where you have like the nice good palm trees and everything else. Sometimes it can become a nesting ground for rodents.
Mm-hmm.
So where is the balance
Mm-hmm.
between, you know, the natural the area and the critters that can go into these areas, and then it becomes, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to repeat that really quickly just to make sure everybody heard online. So the idea is sometimes maintenance becomes an issue, and how do we find the balance between putting together landscapes that are wild that then may become harboring rodents or other maintenance issues?
Yeah, I mean, on that topic, yeah, it's funny. Like people come to us sometimes and like, we love your style. And then they're like, but we don't want any bugs. And it's like, wait, it is an issue. I think basically we would just try to not have habitat near the house if that's a really big issue for people. We also struggle with gophers, you know, and like we have to have gopher traps and things on our project that feel a bit weird in the context of like trying to create all this wildlife habitat and then killing gophers in another, you know, context. And I think it's all in this gray area of just trying to make people comfortable with a certain amount of kind of like unpredictability and wildness, but also, you know, we are in the service industry. We do have to kind of like work with them and yeah, I don't have a specific answer about the rat thing exactly, but I think sometimes people's fear is outsized to the reality of a situation. And especially if you are having regular maintenance, that solves a lot of issues about things like unwanted animals in the landscape. In terms of the like how to maintain native landscapes, I think that's a great point. And we do struggle with that. And I think it's just one of these, it's like a growing pain of changing the perception of what people want and are after. And of course, there's going to be kind of a period where the translation of that takes a bit of time to kind of learn and adapt to. And so that's why we do try to stay involved with the gardener after a project, usually making like seasonal visits. And so it's like, okay, the grass are going to get a haircut the first year. You just say, hey, don't do that next time. And then the next year they'll grow back and it will be okay in general. But it's a good point. I think it's a real struggle, to like have people care enough to pay for good maintenance long-term, and B, to have teams that are kind of like adapting to a new aesthetic expectation for projects. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think we have time for another question if we have another one. Oh, Pamela, you have one from yourself or
It's actually
online?
quite quiet online. There's a continuing discussion about sort of cover cropping. So, but I think it would be interesting to explore the difference between our, you know, what the American public anyway, has grown to accept as landscaping since the, mid 1800s to now as being very simplistic, really. And not really being ecosystem centric, not having those multiple layers of complexity. And certainly designers that I've worked with often fall into, the characterization of a landscape as, well, it's hardscape, irrigation, and plants. And that reductive approach to landscaping is really in stark contrast with what you're doing. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the drive to complexity and how that, is it difficult to do? Is it, do people accept it? Just maybe talk a little bit about that, because it's clear in your examples that you are creating much more complex ecosystem-centric design.
Yeah, and a lot of that's, I mean, it's a lot of just experimentation and trial and error. And I don't think it's particularly challenging design-wise. But yeah, it's really just an aesthetic question. And I think when we started, we did do more simple sort of landscapes, and they were perhaps a bit more reductive. And I think just over time, by continuing to sort of ask questions and try not to repeat ourselves, it's pushed us to, like change and evolve and try different things. So yeah, I think maybe just the idea that practice should always be learning and growing. I think landscape is one of those things that you just could never master. It's just so complex and interesting and endlessly different. Each site is different, each ecosystem is different. You drive 10 miles and it's like a completely different ball game. And I think just taking joy and pleasure in that part of it and allowing that to be a part of, the design, I think is a big part of the way we work and why we do the things we do. But, I will also say people now come to us because of what we offer. So I think that kind of like uphill battle of saying, okay, we're not going to do this cookie cutter thing. We're not going to do like a modernist, landscape that looks really slick. We're going to actually do something totally crazy and different. Like that uphill battle is a bit eased for us now because we have kind of this deep-ish portfolio of projects that we can say we've done this many times and it works and people love it, and I hope that can help other people work this way. And I hope that it continues to like change hearts and minds, I guess, through like social media and other kind of outlets, because there's other ways of doing things.
Yeah, it's interesting how the ecological aspects are all behind it, but people need to see the aesthetics to kind of go, okay. And then the more they get hooked in by the aesthetics, they'll start to really come to a real interest in the ecology behind it. And then it continues to kind of cycle from there.
Totally.
And now that we see so many examples with so many different people and firms doing this work, there's so much more for people to grasp and to go from there. It's really, really helpful. Okay, how are we doing on time? We're at 12:15, so we're about ready to wrap it up. So thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I just wanted to make a couple quick words before I pass it back to Shelkie. A few great resources in our area. South Bay Green Gardens is a wonderful website to get information about upcoming events that might be maintenance training, all sorts of things. The Native Plant Society, cnps.org, is wonderful for when you're looking to want to get connection with wild plants. The appropriate way is to not go out yourself and collect them, but to get them from a nursery that has a permit to do that, like they did in the presentation. So they've worked through a nursery, and there are nurseries listed on CNPS, and you can get connected with how you can bring those wild species in appropriately to your landscapes.
And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that many years ago, a colleague of mine and I developed what was called the Sustainable Landscape Roundtable. It was a group of us professionals who got together, shared ideas, questions. What are you doing? How's the sheet mulching working? How's your soil prep practices? All these things that we've started talking about and continue to at every summit. And we're actually going to meet tomorrow at Kirk Park, which is in the Cambrian area of San Jose. And we're going to meet from 12 noon to 1 p.m. So it's informal, bring your lunch. If you are a landscape professional who wants to connect and be part of our community, which we all depend on each other and like to collaborate, come talk to me if you need more information about the location, but you're welcome to join and would love to have you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Shelkie, who will bring us to a close with a few words.
Thank you for attending the Landscape Summit this year. We hope you all enjoy the event. Thank you for attending the Landscape Summit this year. We hope you all enjoy the event. I know I'm inspired. And we'd love to know how to make this even better. We'll be sending out an email later with a survey. I know it can be a struggle to get excited about surveys after the glow of a conference has faded. But if we want another 10 years of excellence, we need your input. Finally, if this excited you and you work in the landscape industry, please join us on the Valley Water Landscape Committee. The Landscape Committee offers an opportunity to exchange information and ideas between Valley Water staff and the landscape community. With the goal of conserving water, you can indicate your interest in the survey, or for those of you here in person, there's a sign-up sheet by the registration table. And now Ashley has a few words before we break for the day. Ashley.
I'll be fast because I know I am standing between you and the lunch that is sitting out there. But I just, want to again express our appreciation from, on behalf of Valley Water for you all being here and your willingness to, learn, these new concepts if they're new to anyone and to really apply this in the field. We do consider you kind of our ambassadors for landscape conservation. So, thank you for being here. I wanted to take a moment also to thank G3, who has quietly been in the back kind of running the show. So we have Pamela, Anna, Marianne, and Noah who have been back there. And so we have, there's a lot behind, putting these events on, and we appreciate you all being here. And then lastly, I also want to thank our team of interns who have been also running around, and we have some of our Tim Stenars in the front keeping time, and just thank everybody for their work here. So again, as Shelkie mentioned, we do have a landscape committee. It meets every other month. We do really encourage you all to be a part of that. Your input helps inform our programs. It helps inform the literature that we put out, the resources for customers, what's being used. And so we do really appreciate it. You don't need to attend all the time. You can attend when you can. It doesn't really matter. We have a really long, I have a big email list. So don't be worried that signing up is a commitment to have to be there all the time. You can be there when you can, and we totally appreciate that. So our sign up sheet is out there. And with that, again, thank you all for being here, and feel free to hang out. We've got this space for a while. Grab your lunch, sit down, socialize. We want this to be a networking opportunity for you all as well. Thank you.